The sound came first, not the crack of bones breaking or the wet snap of ligaments tearing, but something quieter, more final. The exhale. 301 Navy SEALs standing in formation, breath leaving their lungs in unison, a collective gasp that rolled across the open-air arena like a wave hitting rock. Master Chief Devon Torres had heard a lot of sounds in 36 years of military service. The zip of rounds passing close enough to feel the heat, the thump of a teammate's body hitting the deck after taking fire, the silence that follows when you realize the man next to you isn't getting back up. But he had never heard 300 operators go silent at exactly the same moment, not until today. On the map below, two men lay in positions the human body wasn't designed to hold. The first, Petty Officer Second Class Garrett Shaw, had his shoulder torqued backward at an angle that made the tendons in Torres's own neck tighten in sympathy. The second, Petty Officer First Class Cole Brennan, clutched his forearm like he was trying to hold the bones together through sheer will. Both men were making sounds, low and guttural, the kind that come when pain arrives faster than the brain can process it. Between them stood Staff Sergeant Maya Thier, 5 feet 7 inches, 140 pounds, breathing steady and controlled. Her boots were planted, shoulder-width apart. Her hands hung loose at her sides. Her expression carried the same neutral focus she'd worn when she'd stepped onto the mat 4 seconds ago. She looked like someone who just finished a training drill, not someone who just dismantled 2 elite operators in less time than it takes to tie a boot. Torres stood at the edge of the arena, one hand resting on the railing that separated observers from participants. His jaw was tight. His eyes moved from Shaw to Brennan to Thier, cataloging details the way he'd been trained to do for 3.5 decades. Shaw's shoulder wasn't just dislocated. The joint had separated completely. The humerus pulled free from the socket with enough force that Torres could see the deformation even from 20 feet away. Brennan's radius had snapped mid-shaft. Clean break, no compound fracture, but the forearm bent at an angle that made several men in the front row look away. A younger SEAL in the back row broke the silence with a whisper that carried farther than he'd intended. "What just happened?" No one answered, because the men who understood what they just witnessed were still processing the gap between expectation and reality. They'd come to watch a demonstration. Controlled speed, instructional technique, the kind of thing you see at symposiums where everyone moves at half pace and nobody gets hurt. They hadn't come to watch 2 of their own get folded like cheap lawn furniture by a woman half their size, who looked like she'd barely broken a sweat. Torres's mind was already 3 steps ahead, running through protocols and consequences. Medical response, injury reports, investigations. Someone was going to ask questions, and those questions were going to require answers that didn't make the Navy look like it had just thrown a staff sergeant into a meat grinder for entertainment. But beneath the operational thinking, beneath the 36 years of training that taught him to compartmentalize and prioritize, something else stirred. Something he hadn't felt in a long time. Respect, not the automatic deference you showed to rank or experience, not the professional courtesy that lubricated the gears of military hierarchy. Real respect, the kind you couldn't manufacture or assign, the kind that arrived when someone did something you didn't think was possible and made it look easy. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. 6 hours earlier, none of these men knew her name. Most of them didn't know she existed, and the ones who did know had already decided she didn't belong. Let's go back. The morning started the way most mornings started at Triton Proving Grounds. Cold, gray, the kind of coastal dawn where the sun took its time burning through the marine layer and everything looked washed out and colorless until 0800. Torres had been awake since 0430, same as he'd been every morning for the past 36 years. His body didn't need an alarm anymore. Decades of pre-dawn musters and emergency calls had rewired his circadian rhythm until sleeping past 0500 felt like failure. He pulled on his running shoes, old Asics with 300 miles on them, the treads worn smooth in the spots where his gait put the most pressure. Some guys replaced their running shoes every 6 months. Torres ran his until the soles separated from the uppers, then ran them another month just to prove a point. Waste not. The Corps had taught him that. The SEALs had reinforced it. The route he ran hadn't changed in 2 years. Out through the main gate, left on Coastal Highway, 3 miles north to the turnoff, then back along the beach access road where the sand was hard-packed and flat. 6 miles total, 42 minutes if he pushed, 45 if he didn't. This morning he wasn't pushing. His knees had been talking to him lately, reminding him that 58 wasn't 28, and all those jumps and ruck marches and hard landings had accumulated interest over the years. Four other men ran with them. Commander Elias Kane, 56, built like a fire hydrant with legs, scars running up both forearms from an IED in Ramadi that had turned his Humvee into a fireball. Senior Chief Wade Mercer, 52, lean and hard, the kind of operator who could run a marathon before breakfast and still have energy to make everyone around him feel inadequate. Chief Petty Officer Frank Castellano, 54, stocky, quiet, the guy who never said much but noticed everything. And Master Gunnery Sergeant Rick Halsey, 50, technically Marine Corps, but attached to SEAL training cadre for the past 3 years. A corpsman with more combat deployments than most operators. They didn't talk much during the run. The rhythm of boots on pavement, breath synchronized, the ocean visible to their right, dark and restless under the gray sky. This was their time. No junior enlisted asking questions, no officers demanding reports, no meetings or briefings or administrative bullshit. Just 5 old warriors grinding out miles because that's what they'd always done, and they'd keep doing it until their bodies gave out or the Navy told them to stop. It was Mercer who broke the silence as they turned onto the beach access road. Heard they're sending us a female instructor. Kane grunted. Logistics medical response. Cross-branch certified. Castellano's breathing didn't change. He kept his cadence steady. What's the specialty? Kane glanced at him. Constraint survival protocols. Escape and neutralization under hostile restraint conditions. Torres said nothing. He'd already read the file. Captain Marcus Holt had dropped it on his desk 3 days ago with instructions to review and provide an assessment. Staff Sergeant Maya Thier, 14 years in service, 6 deployments, 3 combat zones, certifications in advanced trauma medicine, high-angle rescue, and some kind of hybrid close-quarters defense system Torres had never heard of. The file was impressive on paper, but Torres had seen a lot of impressive files that didn't translate to competence in the real world. Mercer's voice carried an edge that Torres recognized. Diversity theater. Kane didn't respond immediately. He was the senior officer in the group, the one who had to navigate the political realities that Torres and the others could afford to ignore. Navy's pushing integration hard. Special operations community is the last holdout. Mercer's pace didn't slow, but his jaw tightened. Standards are standards. You lower them, people die. Nobody argued, because on some level, everyone in this group agreed. They'd all seen combat. They'd all been in situations where physical strength was the difference between mission success and body bags. You couldn't negotiate with physics. You couldn't lobby gravity. And when you needed to drag a 240-pound teammate through a kill zone while wearing 80 pounds of gear, your commitment to equality didn't mean shit. Torres kept his thoughts to himself. He'd learned a long time ago that the loudest voices in these debates were usually the ones with the least experience to back them up. Mercer had strong opinions, but Mercer had also never worked with a female medic in a combat zone. Torres had, twice. Once in Mogadishu in '93, when a female Army flight surgeon had kept 3 Rangers alive after their Black Hawk went down, and once in Afghanistan in '06, when a female corpsman had run 200 meters through enemy fire to reach a wounded Marine and dragged him back using nothing but a poncho and sheer fucking determination. Were those women as strong as the men around them? No. Could they do everything the men could do? No, but they'd done what needed doing when it mattered, and that was the only metric Torres gave a damn about. Still, he understood the resistance. This wasn't about capability in the abstract. This was about whether a woman could function in the SEAL teams, where the standards were higher and the margins thinner and the consequences more immediate. Torres didn't know the answer. He suspected nobody did. But he knew that refusing to even ask the question was its own kind of failure. The run ended at 06:15. They stopped at the equipment shed, stretched in silence, then dispersed to their respective duties. Torres headed for the showers, then the chow hall, then his office in the training administration building. He had reports to review, evaluations to write, the endless paperwork that accumulated when you'd been in the service long enough that people assumed you knew what you were doing. At 07:30, his phone rang. Captain Holt's assistant. The captain wanted to see him. Now. Holt's office was on the 3rd floor of the command building, corner suite with windows overlooking the training compound. Holt was standing when Torres entered, hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the obstacle course where a group of candidates was struggling through the rope traverse. He didn't turn around when Torres came to attention. At ease, Master Chief. Torres relaxed his posture but didn't sit. Holt was the kind of officer who preferred to stand during conversations. Something about maintaining energy and focus. Torres thought it was performative bullshit, but Holt was decent enough as commanding officers went, so he played along. Holt finally turned. He was 45, fit, graying at the temples in a way that made him look distinguished instead of old. Staff Sergeant Thier arrives at 1100. I need you to observe the demonstration tomorrow. Torres nodded. Yes, sir. Holt's expression was unreadable. I want your honest assessment. No politics, no agenda. Just your professional opinion on whether she's qualified to instruct our operators. Torres met his eyes. You'll get it. Holt studied him for a moment. There's going to be pressure, Master Chief. From both sides. People who want her to succeed for the wrong reasons. People who want her to fail for the wrong reasons. I need someone who doesn't give a damn about any of that. Someone who only cares whether she can do the job. That's me, sir. I know it is. That's why you're here. Holt dismissed him. Torres left the office and headed back down to the compound. The morning had warmed slightly, the marine layer finally burning off, revealing the kind of pale blue sky that California mornings produced when they weren't busy being overcast and miserable. He found Castellano in the equipment bay, running inventory on medical kits. Frank, need a minute. Castellano looked up. What's going on? Torres leaned against the doorframe. Holt wants me to assess the new instructor. The female one. Castellano's expression didn't change. He went back to counting supplies. You read the file? Torres nodded. Looks good on paper. Castellano was quiet for a moment. I heard about the North Atlantic incident. Torres straightened. What did you hear? Castellano set down the kit he was holding. Mini substructural failure. 2 divers trapped. She went down and pulled them out, nearly drowned in the process. Torres had read the official report. It was sanitized, classified, the kind of document that told you something happened without telling you what actually happened. Where did you hear that? Castellano shrugged. I know a guy at Boomid. He was on the review board. Said it was the gutsiest thing he'd ever seen. Also said she refused to sign a falsified safety report afterward and got reassigned here as punishment. Torres absorbed that information. Captain involved? Castellano nodded. Sutherland, Clayton Sutherland. You know him? Torres knew of him. Sutherland was ambitious, political, the kind of officer who cared more about his career trajectory than the people under his command. If Sutherland had tried to bury a safety incident and Thier had refused to play along, that explained why she was here instead of somewhere that mattered. Thanks for the heads up, Torres said. Castellano went back to his inventory. For what it's worth, Devon, if she's got the integrity to tank her own career over a safety report, she's probably got the integrity to tell us the truth about what she can and can't do. Torres considered that, maybe. Or maybe she's stubborn and doesn't know when to quit. Castellano smiled. Sounds like someone else I know. Torres left the equipment bay and headed toward the barracks. He wanted to see Thier arrive. Wanted to watch how she handled herself when she thought nobody important was paying attention. You learn more about people in unguarded moments than you ever did in formal settings. At 10:55, a helicopter descended through the thinning clouds. UH-60 Blackhawk, rotors chopping the air into rhythmic pulses that echoed across the compound. It touched down on the landing pad near the admin building, skids settling onto concrete with a hydraulic hiss. The side door opened and a figure stepped out. Torres watched from the second-floor window of the training building. Thier was exactly what the file had described. Average height, lean build, dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun. She wore standard fatigues, boots polished but not shined to parade ground standards, a duffel bag slung over one shoulder. She moved with the economy of someone who'd carried heavy loads over long distances. No wasted motion, no hesitation. She kept her head down and walked directly toward the admin building without looking around or slowing her pace. The rotors were still spinning. The noise made conversation impossible. She disappeared into the building before the helicopter lifted off again. Torres left his observation post and headed downstairs. He didn't approach her, didn't introduce himself, just watched from a distance as she checked in at the front desk. The petty officer behind the counter looked up, glanced at her rank insignia, then back at his computer screen. His expression was blank, but his body language spoke volumes. Shoulders slightly turned away. Minimal eye contact. typing slower than necessary. The universal signals of someone who didn't want to be dealing with whatever was in front of them. Thea didn't react. She waited patiently while the petty officer took his time entering information. When he finally slid a folder across the desk, she took it without comment. Keycards inside. Barracks C, third floor. Briefings at 1600 in the operations center. Thank you, she said. Her voice was level, professional, neither warm nor cold. The petty officer said nothing. He was already looking back at his screen, dismissing her before she'd even left. Torres saw her shoulders tighten slightly, the only indication that she'd registered the slight. Then she turned and walked down the corridor, boots echoing against the tile. Torres stayed where he was for another minute, thinking. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. The line rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. Boom, Dr. Chen speaking. Patricia, it's Devin Torres. There was a pause. Devin, it's been a while. What do you need? Torres got straight to the point. North Atlantic incident. 18 months ago. Mini substructural failure. I need to know what actually happened. Another pause, longer this time. That's classified, Devin. I know it is. I'm asking anyway. Dr. Patricia Chen sighed. Why? Because the staff sergeant involved just arrived at my facility, and I need to know if she's the real deal or if someone's setting her up to fail. The line went quiet. Torres could hear background noise, the ambient sounds of a busy medical office. Finally, Chen spoke. I can't give you details, but I can tell you this. Those 2 divers she pulled out, Kowalski and Santos, they owe her their lives, and she nearly died doing it. Held a needle catheter in place for 90 seconds while the compartment flooded around her. Water was past her nose. She stayed under until the pressure equalized, then they pulled her out. She was hypothermic, oxygen-deprived, barely conscious. Spent 3 days in intensive care. Torres's grip tightened on the phone. And the safety report? Chen's voice hardened. Wells on that sub failed inspection twice. Sutherland pushed them through anyway because he was behind schedule. After the incident, he tried to bury it, blamed environmental factors. Thea refused to sign. He had her reassigned within 3 weeks. Torres was quiet for a moment. She filed a complaint? No, she just took the hit and moved on. Why? Chen laughed, but there was no humor in it, because filing a complaint would have ended her career anyway, just slower and more painful. At least this way, she still gets to do her job. Torres thanked her and ended the call. He stood in the hallway for a long moment, staring at nothing. Then he headed back to his office. He had a briefing to prepare for, and a decision to make about whether he was going to let this play out the way Mercer and the others wanted, or whether he was going to do something about it. At 15:55, Torres entered the operations center. The briefing room was half full. Rows of chairs facing a podium, a projector screen on the wall. Men in fatigues, some standing, some sitting, talking in low voices. Torres took a seat in the back row and waited. At exactly 1600 hours, Captain Holt entered. The room quieted. Holt was punctual to a fault. The kind of officer who believed that being on time meant being 5 minutes early and being late was a cardinal sin. Gentlemen, Holt began and then paused. And Staff Sergeant Thier. A few heads turned. Torres followed their gazes and saw Thier sitting in the second row, 3 seats from the aisle. She didn't react to the attention, just kept her eyes forward, expression neutral. Holt continued. Tomorrow at 0800 hours, we will conduct the annual Constraint Survival Readiness Audit. This is a demonstration and evaluation of advanced escape and neutralization techniques applicable to high-risk entrapment scenarios. Subsurface, confined space, hostile pressure environments. He clicked a remote. The projector displayed a diagram of a human body in prone position, restraint points marked in red. Our instructor for this evolution is Staff Sergeant Thier. She has been cross-certified in constraint survival protocols and has operational experience in subsurface rescue and trauma response. Torres watched the room. Most of the men were paying attention, but their body language ranged from skeptical to openly hostile. A few had their arms crossed, others were leaning back in their chairs, the universal posture of people who'd already decided they weren't going to be impressed. Holt advanced the slide. The demonstration will be observed by all 301 Navy SEALs currently in rotation at this facility. Torres felt the weight of that number. 301, not a handful, not a platoon. Every single operator on base. This wasn't just an evaluation. This was theater, a statement. And whether Holt intended it or not, Thea was being put on display for an audience that had already decided she didn't belong. Holt clicked to the next slide. Protocol for this demonstration is as follows. Controlled speed, no competitive force application, clear safety boundaries. Volunteer attackers will simulate entrapment conditions. The instructor will demonstrate escape and neutralization techniques. This is not a test of strength. This is a test of technique and precision. He paused, looked directly at the assembled men. Let me be clear, this is an instructor qualification evaluation. Staff Sergeant Thea's performance tomorrow will determine whether we continue to integrate cross-branch instructors into advanced training pipelines. The stakes are high, the standards are higher. His gaze shifted to Thea. Questions? She shook her head once. No, sir. Good. Dismissed. The room emptied. Torres stayed in his seat, watching Thea gather her materials. She moved deliberately, no hurry, no nervousness visible in her movements. When she stood and headed for the door, Torres stood as well and followed at a distance. In the hallway outside, two men were talking. Torres recognized them immediately. Garrett Shaw and Cole Brennan. Both Poseidon team, both known for aggressive training styles and egos to match. Shaw was barrel-chested, thick-necked, the kind of guy who looked like he'd been assembled from spare bulldozer parts. Brennan was leaner but coiled, sinewy muscle and fast twitch reflexes. Shaw's voice carried, "What's she going to teach us? How to duck?" Brennan smirked. "This is diversity theater. Watch. She'll fold in 30 seconds. Thea walked past them without looking, without slowing, without acknowledging they'd spoken. Her face remained neutral. But Torres saw the slight tension in her shoulders, the infinitesimal tightening of her jaw. She'd heard, and she'd filed it away. Torres waited until she was out of earshot. Then he stepped into Shaw and Brennan's line of sight. Both men straightened immediately, recognizing rank and experience. "Master Chief," Shaw said. Torres looked at him for a long moment. "Tomorrow's a controlled demonstration. You understand what that means?" Shaw nodded. "Yes, Master Chief. It means controlled speed. No competitive force, no escalation." "Clear." "Clear, Master Chief." Torres shifted his gaze to Brennan. "Clear?" Brennan hesitated just for a fraction of a second. "Crystal, Master Chief." Torres held his eyes for another beat. "Good." Dismissed. They left. Torres stood alone in the hallway, jaw tight. He'd just given them a direct order. But orders only worked if people followed them. And he'd been around long enough to know that young operators full of testosterone and ego didn't always make the best decisions when they felt their status was threatened. He pulled out his phone and sent a text to Kane. "We might have a problem tomorrow. Call me." 3 minutes later, his phone rang. Kane's voice was steady. "What's going on?" Torres filled him in. The conversation in the hallway, the body language, the smirks. Kane listened without interrupting. When Torres finished, Kane was quiet for a moment. "You think they'll go off script?" Torres leaned against the wall. "I think Shaw and Brennan are the kind of operators who believe their reputation depends on not looking weak. And I think they're about to make a mistake. You want me to talk to them? Won't help. They've already decided what they're going to do. So what do you want to do?" Torres closed his eyes, let it play out. "But I'm going to be ready to step in if it goes bad." Kane was silent for several seconds. "Devin, if she can't handle pressure from two junior operators, she can't handle this job." Torres opened his eyes. "That's not the point. The point is we don't sabotage our own people to prove a point. If she fails on merit, fine. But if she fails because Shaw and Brennan decided to play games, that's on us." Kane sighed. "Agreed. I'll be there tomorrow. Front row. If it goes sideways, we stop it." "Roger that." Torres ended the call and headed back to his office. It was 1800 hours. Dinner would be served in the chow hall at 1830. He wasn't hungry, but he went anyway. Routine mattered, especially when everything else was uncertain. The chow hall was half full when he arrived. Torres got his tray, filled it with food he didn't particularly want, and found a seat near the windows. He ate slowly, mechanically, his mind elsewhere. Thea entered 20 minutes later. She moved through the line, selected her food, paid, then scanned the room for a seat. Most of the tables were occupied by groups of men, clusters of teammates and friends. She chose a corner table, sat alone, and pulled out a tablet. She ate while reviewing something on the screen, her focus complete. Torres watched her. She didn't look around, didn't try to make eye contact with anyone, didn't attempt to insert herself into conversations. She just existed in her own space, self-contained and self-sufficient. It was a survival strategy Torres recognized. When you were the outsider, when you knew you weren't wanted, you made yourself small. You didn't give people reasons to notice you or opportunities to engage. Shaw and Brennan entered the chow hall 10 minutes later. They got their food and sat with a group of Poseidon teammates. Their laughter was loud, performative, meant to carry. Torres saw Thea's shoulders tighten slightly, but she didn't look up from her tablet, didn't react, just kept eating, kept reading, kept existing in her isolated bubble. After 30 minutes, she finished her meal, cleared her tray, and left. Torres waited another 5 minutes, then did the same. Outside, the sun was setting. The sky had turned orange and pink, the marine layer returning to claim the coast. Torres walked toward the barracks, hands in his pockets, thinking about tomorrow. About what was going to happen when 301 men gathered to watch a woman try to prove she belonged in their world. About what Shaw and Brennan were planning. About what Thea knew or didn't know. He reached the barracks and climbed to the 3rd floor. Her room was at the end of the hallway. The door was closed, light visible underneath. He stood there for a moment, debating whether to knock, to warn her, to give her a heads up about what was coming. But he didn't, because if he warned her, he'd be admitting that the system was rigged, that the test wasn't fair, that the demonstration tomorrow wasn't about her capability, but about proving a predetermined conclusion. And if he admitted that, he'd have to do something about it, and he wasn't ready to make that decision yet. So he turned and walked back to his own quarters. He'd watch tomorrow. He'd observe. And if it went bad, he'd intervene. But until then, he'd let the situation develop on its own. At 2200 hours, Torres lay in his rack, staring at the ceiling. His room was small, functional. A bed, a desk, a locker. No personal effects except a single photograph on the nightstand. Mogadishu, 1993. Torres as a young petty officer standing with his team. Half of those men were dead now. The other half were scattered across the country, retired or reassigned, or too broken to continue. He thought about that medic in Mogadishu, the female army surgeon who'd kept 3 Rangers alive after their Black Hawk went down. He remembered watching her work, hands steady, voice calm, directing the chaos around her while bullets snapped overhead. She'd been half the size of the men she was treating, but size hadn't mattered. Competence had. He thought about the corpsman in Afghanistan, the woman who'd run 200 meters through enemy fire to reach a wounded Marine. He'd been there, providing cover, watching her move through the kill zone like it was a Sunday jog. She'd reached the Marine, assessed his wounds, and dragged him back, using a poncho as a makeshift sled. The Marine had lived. She'd earned a Bronze Star. And Torres had never questioned her capability again. But this was different. This was the SEAL teams, where the standards were higher and the missions harder and the margin for error non-existent. Could a woman function here? Torres didn't know. Nobody did. The data didn't exist yet. But he knew one thing. If Maya Thea was going to fail, it should be because she couldn't do the job. Not because Shaw and Brennan decided to sabotage her for sport. He closed his eyes. Tomorrow would come early. It always did. At 0300 hours, Torres woke. Not from an alarm or a nightmare, just the internal clock that had governed his life for 36 years. He lay in the darkness for a few minutes, listening to the silence. Then he got up, got dressed, and went for a run. Alone this time. No Kane, no Mercer, no Castellano. Just Torres in the darkness and the sound of his own breathing. He ran the same route, 6 miles, but pushed harder. 40 minutes instead of 45. His knees complained, but he ignored them. Pain was just information. You acknowledged it and kept moving. When he returned to base, the sky was beginning to lighten. 0530. He showered, dressed in fresh fatigues, and headed to the chow hall. Coffee first, then food, then the long wait until 0800. At 0615, he saw Thea. She was in the gym, alone, running through movement drills. Slow, controlled, precise. Her focus was absolute. She didn't notice him watching from the doorway. Torres recognized his techniques: joint manipulation practice, leverage exercises, balance conditioning, the kind of maintenance work that serious practitioners did to keep their bodies calibrated and their skills sharp. Every movement was exact, every angle deliberate, no wasted energy, no unnecessary flourish. He watched for 5 minutes. Then he left without announcing his presence. She didn't need his validation. She needed to prepare on her terms. At 0730, Torres headed to the arena. The open-air facility was empty, the mat clean and waiting. He walked the perimeter, checking sight lines, noting where the sun would be at 0800. Details mattered. If something went wrong, he wanted to know exactly what had happened and why. By 0745, the SEALs began arriving, first in small groups, then in larger clusters. By 0755, all 301 were assembled, standing in formation, tight rows, arms crossed or hands clasped behind backs. The energy was tense, expectant. 301 men waiting to see if the woman who'd been forced into their world could survive the first real test. At 0758, Thea arrived. She walked onto the mat carrying her gear bag, set it down near the center, and began unpacking. Training harness, simulated tangle net, padded cuffs, standard equipment for constraint drills. She laid each piece out methodically, checking straps and buckles, testing tension. Torres stood at the edge of the arena, 20 feet from the mat. He could see her hands. Steady, no tremor. But he knew fear when he saw it. She was terrified, just hiding it better than most people could. At exactly 0800 hours, Captain Holt stepped onto the steel riser at the edge of the arena. His voice carried across the space without amplification. This morning's drill will demonstrate close quarters reversal under simulated subsurface entanglement conditions. Our instructor, Staff Sergeant Maya Thier, has been authorized to perform live demonstrations of release and neutralization techniques applicable to medics or divers trapped under hostile pressure. He paused. Let me be clear. Each maneuver is approved. All force will be controlled. The purpose of this session is to observe efficiency, not brute execution. Another pause. Then Holt added something Torres hadn't expected. Staff Sergeant Thier is also the reason 2 men are alive after a structural collapse off the coast of Greenland 18 months ago. So if you're expecting a performance, you're in the wrong place. The murmur that had been building died instantly. The silence that replaced it was heavier. 301 men recalibrating their assumptions in real time. Holt's voice cut through the quiet again. I need 2 volunteers to play the role of attackers. You will apply standard downward control, no competitive force, no escalation. This is a controlled demonstration. Before he finished the sentence, 2 men stepped forward from the front row. Shaw, Brennan. Torres's jaw tightened. Here we go. Torres watched Shaw and Brennan move toward the mat with the kind of focus that came from 3.5 decades of reading body language in high-stakes situations. Their approach wasn't the casual stride of men preparing for a demonstration. It was the measured stalk of predators sizing up prey. Shaw's shoulders were too rigid, his neck corded with tension that had nothing to do with physical exertion. Brennan cracked his knuckles twice, a nervous habit that Torres had seen in young operators before their first real firefight. Captain Holt frowned from his position on the riser. His expression shifted from neutral observation to something approaching concern. You both understand this is a controlled speed demonstration, no competitive force, no impact trauma. Shaw nodded, his face a mask of professional courtesy. Of course, sir. Brennan added, his voice carrying just enough deference to sound respectful without actually being respectful. We'll follow her lead. Torres felt his hand drift toward his sidearm before he consciously registered the impulse. He didn't draw it, didn't even touch the grip. Just let his hand rest near it, muscle memory taking over. 36 years of reacting to threats had wired his nervous system to recognize danger before his conscious mind could articulate why. And right now, every instinct he possessed was screaming that this was about to go very wrong. On the mat, Maya Thier stood watching the 2 men approach. Torres studied her face, looking for signs of panic or hesitation. He found neither. Her expression remained neutral, professional, but her eyes tracked every movement Shaw and Brennan made. She was cataloging their body language the same way Torres was, reading the same signals, coming to the same conclusions. She knew exactly what they were planning. The question was whether she could do anything about it. Thier lowered herself to the mat slowly, deliberately. Back down, arms at her sides, legs aligned with the marking tape. Textbook prone restraint posture. The position you assumed when you wanted to demonstrate escape techniques under controlled conditions. The position that made you completely vulnerable if the people applying the restraint decided not to follow protocol. Torres saw her eyes shift to Holt. Ready? Holt raised his hand. Begin slow phase contact. Shaw moved first. He dropped his knee outside her left shoulder, planted the other across her sternum. But he didn't apply slow phase pressure, didn't ease his weight down gradually the way you did in a controlled demonstration. He came down hard, full weight, 240 pounds of muscle and bone, concentrated into 2 points of contact. The sound of air leaving her lungs was audible to the front row. A sharp exhale that wasn't quite a gasp, but carried the unmistakable quality of someone who'd just had the wind knocked out of them. Shaw's forearm came down across her collarbone like a steel bar, pressing with enough force that Torres could see her face flush from the pressure on her carotid arteries. Brennan followed immediately. He locked both hands around her ankles and drove his knees into her thighs. Not the loose control grip you use for demonstrations. Competitive grappler wrap, the kind of hold you applied when you wanted to completely immobilize someone, when you wanted to prove that they couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything except submit or break. The arena went absolutely still. 301 men standing in formation, every one of them recognizing what they were seeing. This wasn't demonstration contact. This was real restraint, real pressure. The kind of thing that happened in training accidents when operators got too aggressive and someone ended up injured or worse. Torres's jaw clenched so hard he felt his molars grind together. His hand moved closer to his sidearm. Not to draw it, just to remind himself it was there. Just to have something to focus on besides the rage building in his chest. Shaw leaned close to Thier's face, his breath hot against her skin. "Show us something real, Sergeant." Brennan tightened his grip until his knuckles went white. "Yeah, break free now." Torres took a step forward. He was going to stop this. Going to walk onto that mat and pull Shaw and Brennan off before they hurt her, before they turned this demonstration into something that would require medical evacuation and disciplinary action and all the other consequences that came from operators who couldn't control themselves. But before he could take a second step, Thier's eyes opened fully. Torres froze. There was something in those eyes that stopped him cold. Not fear, not panic, something colder, cleaner, deadlier. The look of someone who just received permission to do something they'd been trained to do but rarely got to execute. Her voice was flat, clear, unmistakable. "You are no longer inside demonstration protocol." Torres recognized the phrase immediately. Section 7.3 of the training manual, code trigger for live response authorization. The verbal cue that told everyone within earshot that the demonstration parameters had been violated, and the instructor was now authorized to use whatever force was necessary to neutralize the threat. The front row stiffened. Every senior SEAL there knew what those words meant, knew what they authorized, knew that Shaw and Brennan had just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Shaw pressed harder, either not understanding or not caring. "Quit talking and move, Sergeant." Brennan grinned, cold and confident. "Yeah, show us." Torres's hands stopped moving toward on his sidearm. He kept it there, ready but not committed, because something in Thier's body language had changed. The tension he'd seen earlier, the fear he'd recognized beneath her professional composure, had vanished. What replaced it was the kind of stillness that came before violence, the calm before the storm, the moment when highly trained people stopped thinking and started executing. Shaw and Brennan didn't see it coming. They were too focused on proving their point, too committed to the performance they were putting on for the 300 men watching. They didn't notice the subtle shift in her hips, didn't register the micro-adjustment of her left elbow, didn't understand that the woman beneath them had just stopped being a demonstration partner and become something else entirely. Torres saw it, saw every detail, and later when people asked him to describe what happened, he would struggle to find words that captured the speed and precision of what unfolded in the next 4 seconds. Thier's body collapsed inward, not from weakness, not from surrender, from calculation. She gave way beneath Shaw's weight, drawing him forward, deeper into what Torres recognized as a trap. His forearm pressed harder across her collarbone, exactly what she wanted, exactly what she needed. Her left elbow rotated upward, with a motion so smooth it looked rehearsed. It didn't rise with force. It pivoted along the line of Shaw's arm like a blade being drawn from its sheath. Her fingers found the space just above his elbow, the vulnerable pocket where nerve bundles ran close to the surface and bone met soft tissue. She hooked, locked, pulled. Shaw's face changed. The confident smirk vanished, replaced by confusion and then the first flash of pain as her fingers compressed nerves that sent signals screaming to his brain. His arm went numb for half a second, just long enough for his grip to weaken, just long enough for the structural integrity of his position to fail. Thier's opposite, Shoulder dropped back half an inch. Her hips torqued. Her spine twisted with the kind of precision that came from 10,000 repetitions. From drilling the same movement until it became automatic. Until your body could execute it without conscious thought, even when your conscious mind was occupied with not drowning, or not dying, or not giving up. Then she drove. The sound that followed was organic, final, unmistakable. The crack of dry wood splitting under pressure, sharp enough to echo across the open arena, loud enough that men 3 rows back flinched involuntarily. Shaw's shoulder capsule dislocated, the joint separated completely, the humerus pulling free from the socket with enough force that Torres could see the deformation even from 20 feet away. But Thier didn't stop there. Momentum carried her through the movement, her body continuing to rotate, and Shaw's elbow hyperextended backward past its natural range of motion. The joint bent wrong, sickeningly wrong, the way joints only bent when ligaments tore and structural support failed, and the body's built-in safety mechanisms got overridden by forces they weren't designed to handle. Torres had seen a lot of injuries in 36 years, compound fractures, traumatic amputations, the kind of damage that happened when explosions met human bodies. But there was something particularly visceral about watching a joint fail, something that made your own joints ache in sympathy, that made your nervous system fire warning signals even though you were just an observer. Shaw's body jerked sideways as if yanked by invisible wire. 240 pounds of muscle and ego reduced to a puppet with cut strings. He hit the mat chest first, hard, his face bouncing against the vinyl. Air exploded from his lungs in a breathless wheeze that sounded like a balloon popping. His legs kicked once, reflexive, useless. His upper body was done. Disarmed, disassembled, broken. Torres looked at his watch without thinking. 2.1 seconds from initial contact to complete incapacitation. Holy shit, someone whispered in the front row. The arena gasped. 301 men. One sound, audible, shocked, involuntary. The kind of collective reaction that happened when something violated every expectation simultaneously. Thier didn't pause, didn't celebrate, didn't even glance at Shaw writhing beside her. She rolled up from her back in a single fluid motion, boots pivoting beneath her, left knee planting lightly against the mat. Her arms came up, not in aggression, in readiness, balanced, controlled, waiting. Brennan was still locked around her ankles. His brain was 3 steps behind his body, still processing what had just happened to Shaw, still trying to reconcile the image of his partner crumpled on the mat with the calm woman now kneeling 2 feet away. What the hell? The words came out strangled, confused, but his hands didn't let go. His training overrode his shock. Hold the position. Maintain control. Lock it down. He yanked hard on her ankles, tried to twist her into a compromised rollover, brought his knee up to clamp across her shin. Torres knew what was coming next, had seen enough of her technique in those first 2 seconds to understand the system she was using. Leverage manipulation, joint isolation, using an opponent's commitment against them. Brennan had just made the same mistake Shaw had. He'd applied maximum force when the situation called for control, and now he was about to pay for it. Thier's hips rotated off-axis, deliberately misaligning her spine. Not to resist Brennan's pull, to redirect it, to use his momentum against him the same way she'd used Shaw's weight. Her left leg slid behind his wrist, not fast, just precisely timed. Her heel hooked the inside of his forearm, right above the ulna, between muscle and joint, exactly where the radius and ulna met in a structure that could handle compression, but not lateral torque. Brennan pulled. She dropped. Her full body weight drove downward and inward, twisting, leveraging, turning his own grip into the mechanism of his destruction. The snap was different from Shaw's crack. Wetter, thicker, like a green branch torn apart instead of snapped clean. The radius fractured mid-shaft, the ulna displaced, soft tissue tore. Torres had heard that sound before, in training accidents and combat injuries, and it never got easier to hear. Brennan's body jolted backward. His hands flew off her legs as if they'd been electrified. His face twisted into something between confusion and agony, his mouth opening, but the sound delayed, as if his brain needed time to catch up to what his nervous system already knew. My arm, my arm, my arm. He staggered back 2 steps, cradling his forearm against his chest, his elbow bent at an angle that made men in the front row look away. The bone hadn't broken through the skin, but the deformation was visible, unmistakable. The kind of injury that required surgical intervention and months of recovery and might never heal properly. Thea rose slowly, deliberately. Her boots found the mat with quiet precision. Her back straightened. Her breathing remained even, steady, controlled. She didn't step toward Brennan, didn't lunge, didn't pursue. She simply pivoted, rotated on her rear foot, reestablishing her stance as if she'd never been pinned at all. Torres's watch read 3.8 seconds since the demonstration had begun. 4 seconds total if you round it up. 4 seconds to completely dismantle two elite operators using nothing but technique and precision and the kind of discipline that lets you hold back even when every instinct screamed to keep going. Because Torres could see it in her positioning, in the angles she'd created and then deliberately not exploited. She'd stopped at joint disable, hadn't driven through Shaw's shoulder to shatter his clavicle, hadn't continued the rotation on Brennan's wrist to turn a radius fracture into a compound break that would have ended his career permanently instead of temporarily. She'd held back, used minimum necessary force to neutralize the threat, exactly the way the manual said, exactly the way you were supposed to when the people attacking you were teammates who'd made a stupid decision instead of enemies who needed to be eliminated. The 301 men watching had seen it too. Torres could see the recognition spreading through the formation like ripples in a pond. The way their postures changed from hostile skepticism to something approaching shock. The way their arms uncrossed and their jaws went slack and their eyes widened with the realization that they just witnessed something they didn't have context for. This hadn't been luck. This had been skill, practiced, refined, executed with surgical precision. The kind of thing that came from years of training and real-world application and the discipline to use violence as a tool instead of a release. Torres stepped onto the mat. He moved calmly, deliberately, projecting authority and control, even though his heart was hammering against his ribs. "Medical response required," he called out. His voice carried across the arena without him having to shout. Two medics sprinted in from the perimeter, kits in hand. They dropped to their knees beside Shaw and Brennan and began emergency stabilization, checking vitals, bracing joints, establishing baselines. But even as they worked, their eyes kept flicking up toward Thea. Quick glances, uncertain, as if they weren't sure whether to treat her as the instructor who just demonstrated a technique or the operator who just put two men down. One of the medics was older, graying at the temples, tattoos running up both forearms. Rick Halsey. Torres knew him from Afghanistan, from late nights in field hospitals, where they'd worked together to keep men alive when the odds said they should have died. Halsey looked up, his eyes narrowing as he worked on Brennan's arm, and recognition sparked across his face. "North Atlantic," Halsey said quietly, just loud enough for Thea to hear. "You're the one who saved Kowalski and Santos." Thea's expression didn't change. She gave Halsey a look, sharp and brief, the kind of look that said, "Don't. Not now, not here, not in front of 300 men who were still deciding what they just witnessed." Halsey got the message. He went back to his work, wrapping Brennan's forearm in a temporary splint, checking for distal pulse, making sure the fracture hadn't compromised circulation. But the words had been spoken, and in an arena filled with 301 men standing close enough to hear a whisper, information traveled fast. The murmur started in the front row. Low, rippling outward like a stone, dropped into still water. North Atlantic, the sub collapse. She saved two guys while pinned herself. Heard she nearly drowned. That was her. The context was shifting, transforming. 60 seconds ago, most of these men had seen Maya Thea as a staff sergeant who'd been forced into their world for reasons they didn't understand or agree with. A diversity hire, a political statement, someone who needed to be tested and would probably fail that test because women didn't belong in this environment. Now they were hearing something different, a story that carried weight in their world. Divers saved under pressure. Life or death decisions made in collapsing structures with water rising and oxygen failing. The kind of situation where most people froze, where training either held or shattered, where you found out what you were actually made of instead of what you thought you were made of. And she'd held. She'd done her job. She'd saved lives. And then she'd been punished for refusing to lie about why it had happened. Torres watched the information spread, watched the way it changed the energy in the formation. Not dramatically, not with sudden acceptance or celebration, but the hostility that had been palpable before, the aggressive skepticism that had permeated every interaction, began to crack. Not breaking, just cracking, letting light through. In the third row, a veteran SEAL with silver hair and more combat ribbons than most men earned in a career leaned toward the operator beside him. "That wasn't power," he said quietly. "That was surgical." The words carried, spread, reverberated through the formation like an echo gaining strength instead of fading. Surgical, that was the word. That was what they'd witnessed. Not a brawl, not a fight, not even a contest. Just anatomy, physics. Leverage applied with the kind of precision that came from understanding exactly how joints failed and exactly how much force was required to disable without destroying. The medics lifted Shaw onto a stretcher. He was conscious, but barely, his face pale and sweating, his good arm clutched across his chest. They moved him carefully toward the waiting ambulance at the edge of the facility. Brennan refused the stretcher, stood on his own, walked under his own power with one medic on each side supporting him. His forearm was splinted and wrapped. His face was a mask of pain and something else, something that looked like shame, the kind that came from realizing you'd made a terrible mistake and now had to live with the consequences. As he passed Thier, he stopped. Just for a second, met her eyes, opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, then closed it again, nodded once, small, almost imperceptible. Then he kept walking. Torres saw the exchange, saw the recognition in Brennan's face, the understanding that what had happened wasn't an attack. It was a response, a consequence, the natural result of violating protocol and forcing someone to defend themselves. And that Thier could have done so much worse, but hadn't. That was discipline. That was control. That was the difference between a warrior and a brawler. The arena began to empty slowly. Men filing out in formation, but the energy was different now. Subdued, contemplative. No one was talking. No one was joking. They moved in silence, processing what they'd witnessed, carrying it back to their units where it would be discussed and debated and dissected for days. Thier bent down and began collecting her gear, packing the harness, rolling the tangle net, returning everything to the duffel with the same care she'd used laying it out. Her hands were steady, no tremor, no visible reaction to what had just happened. Torres walked toward her, stopped at the edge of the mat, waited until she looked up. Their eyes met. Torres extended his hand. She straightened, took his hand. The handshake was brief, firm, the kind of professional acknowledgement that passed between operators who recognized competence in each other. Torres didn't say anything, didn't need to, but he held her eyes for a moment longer than protocol required, making sure she understood that what he was doing wasn't just professional courtesy, it was validation. Public validation in front of whoever was still watching. A senior operator, a master chief with 36 years of service, telling everyone who cared to notice that this woman had just proven something important. He released her hand, turned, and walked away. Behind him, Thier finished packing her gear, shouldered the duffel, and headed toward the exit. The mat was empty now. No blood, no evidence of what had happened except for 2 slight depressions in the vinyl where bodies had hit. In an hour, someone would smooth those out, reset the mat, prepare it for the next evolution. But the memory wouldn't smooth out, wouldn't reset, would stay with every man who'd watched it happen for the rest of their careers. Torres found Commander Kane waiting outside the arena. Kane's expression was unreadable, controlled, but his eyes betrayed what he was thinking. Jesus Christ, Devin. Torres nodded. Yeah, you knew that was going to happen. I suspected, didn't know for sure. Kane was quiet for a moment. Shaw and Brennan are done. Medical separation, both of them. Shaw's shoulder might recover enough for civilian life, but he'll never pass operator physical standards again. Brennan's looking at 12 months minimum rehab, probably longer. Torres felt no satisfaction in that assessment, just the weight of consequence. They made their choice. Kane looked back toward the arena. She held back. I know. If she'd wanted to, she could have ended their careers permanently. Shattered joints instead of dislocating them. Compound fractures instead of clean breaks. Torres met his eyes. She used minimum necessary force to neutralize a threat. Exactly what the manual says. Exactly what we train people to do. Kane nodded slowly. Captain Holt wants a debrief. "JAG's been notified. We've got footage from 4 different angles. This is going to be investigated." As it should be. They walked together toward the command building. The morning had warmed, the marine layer finally burning off completely, revealing a clear blue sky that felt incongruous given what had just happened. Torres's mind was already moving through the next steps: witness statements, medical reports, the disciplinary process that would determine whether Shaw and Brennan faced consequences beyond their injuries. And somewhere in all of that, a determination about whether Maya Thier had violated any protocols or whether she'd simply done exactly what she'd been authorized to do when Shaw and Brennan had forced her hand. Torres already knew the answer, but he also knew that knowing and proving were 2 different things. 3 hours later, Torres sat in a cold, sterile conference room in the JAG building. 3 chairs on one side of a metal table, 1 chair on the other. 3 cameras mounted in corners, red lights blinking. The universal setup for official investigations where everything needed to be documented and nothing could be left to memory or interpretation. Across from him sat 3 officials. Lieutenant Commander Rachel Porter, Navy JAG, 40-something, sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, a tablet in front of her displaying footage from multiple angles. Master Chief Rick Halsey, who'd been called in as a medical expert and witness. And Gregory Mills, a civilian contractor serving as safety oversight director, clipboard and pen at the ready. Torres had been through enough of these sessions to know the rhythm. Questions asked in careful, neutral language, answers given with equal care. Everyone aware that every word was being recorded and could be used later in ways nobody could predict. Porter spoke first. "Master Chief Torres, you were the senior observer for this morning's demonstration. Can you walk us through what you witnessed?" Torres kept his voice level, professional. Staff Sergeant Thier assumed prone position per protocol. Petty Officers Shaw and Brennan approached as volunteer attackers. They were instructed to apply controlled demonstration pressure. Instead, they applied full competitive force. Shaw dropped his full weight onto her sternum and collarbone. Brennan locked her ankles with competition-level torque. Both actions violated the controlled demonstration parameters. Porter made a note on her tablet. At what point did the situation escalate? When Shaw and Brennan ignored the controlled speed directive and applied maximum force contact, Torres said. That was the escalation. What happened after that was response. Porter looked up. Staff Sergeant Thier issued a verbal warning. Can you confirm what was said? Torres nodded. She said, and I quote, "You are no longer inside demonstration protocol." That's code language from Section 7.3 of the training manual. Live response authorization. It tells everyone present that safety parameters have been violated and the instructor is authorized to use necessary force to neutralize the threat. And Shaw and Brennan heard this warning? The entire front row heard it. I heard it from 20 feet away. What was their response? Shaw told her to quit talking and move. Brennan told her to show them. They ignored the warning and maintained full pressure. Porter pulled up footage on her tablet, turned it so Torres could see. The screen showed the mat from a wide angle, every detail visible. Shaw and Brennan approaching. The moment of contact. Thier's warning. Their response. The 4-second sequence that followed. She played it twice. Then she paused on a frame that showed Thier's face in the moment before she moved. Master Chief, in your professional assessment, was Staff Sergeant Thier in danger? Torres looked at the image, saw the pressure on her collarbone, the compression on her ankles, the flush in her face from restricted blood flow. Yes. Shaw's forearm across her carotid could have caused unconsciousness in 15 to 20 seconds. Brennan's ankle lock had enough torque to cause ligament damage if maintained. She was in a position where she couldn't breathe properly, couldn't move, and was at risk of injury or incapacitation. Porter made another note, and her response? Textbook joint manipulation and leverage displacement. She used Shaw's weight against him to create a fulcrum, isolated his elbow joint, applied force perpendicular to the hinge mechanism. Same with Brennan. Used his grip as an anchor point and applied rotational force to the radius ulna junction. Mills, the civilian contractor, spoke for the first time. The injuries sustained were severe. Petty Officer Shaw has posterior shoulder dislocation, torn ulnar collateral ligament, incomplete elbow hyperextension. Petty Officer Brennan has midshaft radius fracture with ulnar displacement and associated soft tissue trauma. Are you saying those injuries were appropriate responses? Torres turned to face him directly. I'm saying they were proportional responses. Staff Sergeant Thier stopped at joint disable. She didn't drive through Shaw's shoulder to fracture his clavicle. She didn't continue rotation on Brennan's wrist to create a compound break. She used the minimum force necessary to neutralize two opponents who outweighed her by 100 pounds each and were applying maximum pressure in violation of safety protocols. Halsey leaned forward. I can confirm that assessment from a medical perspective. The injury patterns are consistent with controlled application of technique, not excessive force. If she'd wanted to cause permanent damage, we'd be looking at shattered joints, nerve damage, potential paralysis. Instead, we're looking at injuries that will heal with proper treatment and rehabilitation. Porter scrolled through more information on her tablet. During our preliminary investigation, we discovered something. She turned the screen toward Torres. An email was sent to both petty officers Shaw and Brennan 24 hours before the demonstration. Torres leaned forward to read. The email was short. Anonymous sender, blocked header. The message was coded but clear. Make sure tomorrow's audit maintains standards. Don't let shortcuts compromise the teams. His jaw tightened. Who sent this? Porter's expression was carefully neutral. We traced the IP address. It originated from the Naval Special Warfare Command Administrative Network, the building that houses senior command staff. Torres felt cold certainty settle in his chest. Mercer. We're investigating, Porter said, but we can't confirm identity yet. Torres sat back. You don't need to confirm anything for me to know who sent it. Senior Chief Wade Mercer has been vocal about his opposition to female instructors in SOF training. He had access to that network, and he had a conversation with Shaw and Brennan the day before the demonstration where he told them to maintain standards. Porter made a note. We'll need a formal statement about that conversation. You'll have it. Mills cleared his throat. Even if this email exists, it doesn't change the fact that two operators sustained career-altering injuries during what was supposed to be a controlled demonstration. Torres turned to him and for the first time let some of his anger show. Those two operators violated every safety protocol we have. They were warned, clearly and explicitly, that they were outside demonstration parameters. They chose to continue anyway. What happened to them was a direct result of their own decisions. The room went quiet. The cameras kept recording, red lights blinking steadily. Porter closed her tablet. Based on the footage, witness testimony, and medical assessment, I'm prepared to make a preliminary determination. Staff Sergeant Thier followed proper procedure. She issued appropriate warning per Section 7.3. She responded with force proportional to the threat. No violation of conduct or excessive force will be filed. Mills looked like he wanted to argue, but Halsey cut him off. Agreed. From a medical and tactical standpoint, her response was appropriate. Torres nodded. Thank you, Commander. Porter stood. We're not done investigating the email or the circumstances that led to this situation. But as far as Staff Sergeant Thier's actions this morning, she's cleared. You can inform her that she's authorized to continue her duties without restriction. Torres stood as well, came to attention briefly, then left the conference room. The hallway outside was empty, quiet, just the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of boots on tile. He pulled out his phone and sent a text to Kane. She's cleared. Investigation continues on the email. The response came back 30 seconds later. Good. Mercer's been called to the captain's office. This isn't over. Torres put his phone away and headed toward the training compound. The sun was high now, the day fully established, the morning's drama already fading into the background noise of base operations. But Torres knew better than to think it was over. This was just the beginning. Shaw and Brennan would be medically separated. Their careers effectively ended. Mercer would face consequences for creating the environment that led to this situation, even if they couldn't prove he'd sent the email. And Maya Thier would continue teaching, continue proving herself, continue existing in a world that still wasn't sure it wanted her. But something had changed. Torres had felt it in the arena, in the way the murmurs had shifted from skeptical to shocked to something approaching respect. 301 men had witnessed something they couldn't ignore, something that made them reconsider assumptions they'd carried for years. That was progress. Slow, painful, bought with broken bones and damaged careers, but progress nonetheless. Torres reached the training building and climbed to his office on the second floor. He sat at his desk, pulled out a notepad, and began writing his formal statement about the Mercer conversation. Every detail, every word, building the case that would determine whether this incident was an isolated failure or part of a larger pattern. Outside his window, the training compound continued its daily rhythm. candidates running obstacle courses, instructors conducting drills, the machinery of SEAL training grinding forward regardless of drama or politics or the personal conflicts that occasionally erupted into violence. Torres wrote for an hour. When he finished, he read through the statement twice, made minor corrections, then signed and dated it. He would submit it to JAG in the morning. For now, he was done. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. 36 years. He'd seen a lot of changes in that time, some good, some bad, most somewhere in between. But he'd never seen anything quite like what had happened this morning. 4 seconds. That's all it had taken to change the equation. 4 seconds to prove that strength wasn't the only thing that mattered. 4 seconds to demonstrate that technique and discipline and years of training could overcome size and aggression and ego. 4 seconds that 301 men would remember for the rest of their lives. Torres opened his eyes and looked at the photograph on his desk. Mogadishu, 1993. Young faces, dead friends, the past that never quite let go. He wondered what those men would think if they could see what had happened today. Whether they'd approve or condemn. Whether they'd understand that the world kept changing, whether you wanted it to or not, and the only choice you had was whether to change with it or get left behind. He didn't know the answer, but he knew what he believed. He believed that competence mattered more than tradition, that results mattered more than comfort, that if someone could do the job, they deserved the chance to prove it. Maya Thier had proven it. In 4 seconds, she'd proven it beyond any reasonable doubt. Now they just had to figure out what to do with that proof. The backlash started quietly, not with formal complaints or official channels, but with the small acts of resistance that defined military culture when people wanted to make their displeasure known without risking their careers. Torres saw it in the chow hall 2 days after the demonstration. The way tables emptied when Maya Thier sat down, the conversations that stopped mid-sentence when she entered a room, the junior SEALs who suddenly needed to be somewhere else when she approached. It wasn't universal. Some operators nodded to her in passing. A few even asked technical questions about the techniques she'd demonstrated. But the hostility was there, simmering beneath the surface, and Torres recognized it for what it was. The last stand of men who'd spent their entire careers in an exclusive club and didn't want to admit that the membership criteria might be changing. On the 4th morning after the incident, Torres arrived at the training compound at 05:30 to find a group of 5 junior SEALs blocking the corridor outside the equipment bay. They weren't standing in formation, just clustered together in a way that made it difficult to pass without squeezing between them. The leader was Petty Officer Jake Cordero, 25 years old, 3 years in the teams, the kind of operator who confused confidence with competence and thought volume could substitute for experience. Cordero saw Torres approaching and straightened slightly, but didn't move. Behind him, the other 4 shifted their weight, ready to follow whatever lead he provided. Torres stopped 10 feet away. "Morning, Cordero. Master Chief." Cordero's voice carried just enough respect to avoid insubordination while making it clear he wasn't particularly interested in showing deference. "You boys got somewhere to be?" "Just heading to morning PT, Master Chief." Torres looked at each of them in turn, took his time, let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Then he nodded toward the corridor. "PT's outside. This is inside. Move." Cordero hesitated for just a fraction of a second, long enough for Torres to know this wasn't random, long enough to understand that someone had put these kids up to something. Then he stepped aside and the others followed. As they filed past, Cordero spoke again, his voice low but deliberately audible. "Heard Staff Sergeant Thier got lucky the other day. Shaw went easy on her." Torres stopped walking, turned slowly, looked Cordero directly in the eyes with the kind of stare that came from 3.5 decades of dealing with young operators who needed to be reminded that rank and experience meant something. "You think Shaw went easy on her, Cordero?" The younger man's jaw tightened. "Just saying what I heard, Master Chief." "Then you heard wrong. Shaw and Brennan applied maximum force in violation of demonstration protocol. They got exactly what they asked for. Now, unless you want to test whether she got lucky, I suggest you get to PT before I find reasons to make your morning significantly less pleasant." Cordero's face flushed, but he knew better than to push further. "Yes, Master Chief." The 5 of them left. Torres stood in the empty corridor for a moment, letting his anger settle. He'd expected resistance, but he'd hoped it would come from the senior operators who actually had the experience and credibility to make informed judgments. Instead, it was coming from kids who'd barely been in the teams long enough to earn their tridents and thought aggression was a substitute for wisdom. He pulled out his phone and sent a text to Commander Kane. "We've got a culture problem. Junior operators getting influenced by someone. Need to address it before it spreads." Kane's response came back 30 seconds later. "Mercer's fingerprints?" Torres typed back. "Can't prove it yet, but yeah." He put his phone away and headed toward his office. The morning was cold, the marine layer thick and oppressive, the kind of weather that made everything feel heavier than it should. He had reports to write, evaluations to complete, the endless administrative work that came with senior enlisted responsibility. But his mind kept circling back to the encounter with Cordero, to the deliberate obstruction, to the comment about Shaw going easy. Someone was working behind the scenes to undermine Thier's credibility, to spread the narrative that what had happened on the mat wasn't skill, just luck or circumstances or Shaw's decision to hold back. It was poison, and it needed to be dealt with before it spread too far. That evening, Torres found himself in the base gym at 1900 hours. He hadn't planned to be there, had intended to grab dinner, review some files, maybe call his daughter in San Diego and check in on her and the grandkids. But something had pulled him to the gym, some instinct that told him he needed to see what was happening when officers and senior NCOs weren't around to observe. The gym was moderately full, 20 or 30 operators scattered across the space, some lifting weights, others running on treadmills, a few working through body weight exercises. Torres grabbed a rowing machine near the back corner and started a slow, steady pull, keeping his head down, but his awareness elevated. 10 minutes later, Maya Thier entered. She wore standard PT gear, moved to an empty section of mat space, and began her conditioning routine. Body weight exercises first, push-ups, squats, core work, then mobility drills, hip rotations, shoulder conditioning, balance exercises on one leg, the methodical work of someone maintaining their physical instrument with the same care a musician showed their instrument. Torres watched from his peripheral vision while maintaining the rhythm of his rowing. Thier was focused, turned inward, not paying attention to the room around her. But Torres saw what she didn't, the way conversations quieted when she entered, the glances thrown her direction, the way 3 operators near the weight rack stopped their sets to watch. One of them said something Torres couldn't hear. The other 2 laughed, not loudly, just enough to make their opinion clear. Thier didn't react, kept working through her routine, but Torres saw the slight tension in her shoulders, the way her jaw tightened just a fraction. She'd heard, and she was choosing to ignore it. Torres finished his rowing set, wiped down the machine, and walked toward the exit. As he passed the weight rack, he stopped, looked at the 3 operators, recognized 2 of them from Cordero's group earlier. "You boys finish your workout?" One of them, a stocky kid with a shaved head, nodded. "Just cooling down, Master Chief." "Good." Torres let his gaze linger. "Because if you've got energy left to run your mouths, I can find training evolutions that'll fix that problem real quick." The 3 of them got the message. They grabbed their gear and left without further comment. Torres glanced toward Thier. She was still working through her routine, apparently oblivious to the exchange. But as Torres headed for the door, she looked up briefly, met his eyes, gave a small nod of acknowledgement. He nodded back and left. Later that night, Torres sat in his quarters reviewing the JAG report that had come through that afternoon. Lieutenant Commander Porter's investigation had concluded what Torres already knew. Shaw and Brennan had violated protocol. Thier had responded appropriately. No disciplinary action would be taken against her. But the report also included something else, a preliminary finding on the anonymous email. The IP address had been traced to a terminal in the Senior Command Administrative Office. Access logs showed that terminal had been used by 4 different people in the 24 hours before the email was sent. One of those people was Senior Chief Wade Mercer. Torres stared at that name for a long time. Mercer was a friend, had been for 20 years. They'd deployed together, trained together, shared the kind of experiences that bonded men in ways that civilian life couldn't replicate. But friendship didn't excuse what Mercer had done, didn't make it acceptable to sabotage another service member, to set up 2 junior operators to fail, to poison the culture because you disagreed with the direction things were heading. Torres picked up his phone, dialed Mercer's number. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. He didn't leave a message, just hung up and sat in the silence of his quarters, thinking about loyalty and integrity and the point where the 2 came into conflict. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Torres opened it and saw a simple message. "Matt, room 3, 2000 hours. We need to talk." No signature, no identification. But Torres recognized the setup. Someone wanted a private conversation away from official channels. He checked his watch. 1945. 15 minutes. He put on his boots, grabbed his jacket, and headed out into the night. The base was quiet, most personnel either in their quarters or at the enlisted club. Torres walked across the compound toward the training building where Mat Room 3 was located. The moon was up, nearly full, casting long shadows across the concrete. The door to Mat Room 3 was unlocked. Torres pushed it open and stepped inside. The lights were on. 20 operators stood waiting. Some Torres recognized, others he didn't. But all of them had the posture and bearing of senior enlisted men who'd been in the teams long enough to know what they were looking at. Standing at the front of the group was Senior Chief Ryan Morrison, 38 years old, graying beard, scar running from his left eyebrow to his hairline. The remnant of an IED in Fallujah that had killed 2 men and left Morrison with a face full of shrapnel. He was one of the most respected operators on base, the kind of SEAL who led by example and didn't waste time on politics. Morrison nodded to Torres. Master Chief, thanks for coming. Torres looked around the room. What's this about? Morrison gestured to the assembled men. We need to talk about what happened 4 days ago, and we need to talk about what we're going to do about it. Torres waited. Let Morrison continue at his own pace. Morrison stepped forward. I've been in the team 16 years. Seen a lot of people come through. Most wash out. Some make it. A few excel. He paused. What Staff Sergeant Thier did on that mat was something I've never seen before. Not the violence, the control, the precision, the discipline to stop when she could have kept going. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. Morrison continued, I've got a team deploying to Kandahar in 3 months. Urban environment, tight spaces, hostile population. If one of my guys gets grabbed in a corridor or a building, I need him to know how to get out without relying on superior strength. Because sometimes you don't have that advantage. Torres saw where this was going. We want her to teach us, Morrison said. Real sessions, not demonstrations. Actual training where we learn the techniques she knows. The stuff that works when everything else fails. Torres looked at the assembled men. All of you? They nodded. Some spoke up. Affirmative. Yes, Master Chief, we're in. Torres was quiet for a moment. Then he asked the question that mattered. Why come to me? Morrison met his eyes because half this base thinks she got lucky. The other half thinks she's dangerous. We need someone with credibility to back her. Someone the young guys respect. Someone who can tell them this isn't politics, it's operational necessity. Torres absorbed that. And you think I'm that person? You're the only person, Master Chief. You've got 36 years in. You've seen combat in 3 wars. You pulled my team out of that ambush in Ramadi when everyone else said it was a suicide mission. If you say she's worth learning from, people will listen. Torres looked around the room again, saw the expectation in their faces, the hope that maybe this situation could turn into something productive instead of destructive, that maybe the conflict and hostility could transform into an opportunity to get better at their jobs. He made a decision. All right, I'll talk to her, see if she's willing to run additional sessions. But understand something. This isn't official training. This is voluntary on your own time, no record of attendance. If you show up because you want to learn, not because you are ordered to. Morrison nodded. Understood. And one more thing. Torres' voice hardened. Anyone who shows up to these sessions with the same attitude Shaw and Brennan had, I will personally ensure they regret it. This is about learning, not testing, not proving anything. Learning. Clear? Crystal, Master Chief. The meeting broke up. Men filed out quietly, heading back to their quarters or the enlisted club. Torres waited until the room was empty, except for Morrison. Ryan, you know there's going to be pushback on this. Morrison shrugged. There's pushback on everything worth doing. Doesn't mean we don't do it. Torres studied him for a moment. Why are you really pushing this? Morrison's expression shifted, became something more vulnerable. My younger brother, Marine Corps, killed in Helmand Province 6 years ago, captured during a patrol, held for 4 hours before they executed him. He paused. Intel reports said he tried to escape, got restrained, couldn't break free, died because he didn't have the skills to get out of a bad position. Torres felt the weight of that statement settle into his chest. Morrison continued, if what she knows can prevent that from happening to someone else's brother, I don't give a damn about politics or tradition or who's uncomfortable with her being here. I care about bringing my guys home alive. Torres nodded slowly. I'll talk to her tomorrow. Morrison extended his hand. Thank you, Master Chief. They shook. Morrison left. Torres stood alone in the empty mat room, thinking about brothers and skills and the price you paid when tradition mattered more than results. The next morning, Torres found Maya Thier in the equipment bay at 0600, conducting inventory on medical supplies. She looked up when he entered, straightened slightly, but didn't come to attention. They were past that kind of formality. Master Chief, Torres moved to stand beside her, helping check supplies without being asked. We need to talk. About? Last night, 20 senior operators approached me. They want you to run additional training sessions, real instruction, not demonstrations. They want to learn what you know. Thier was quiet for a moment, kept checking supplies. Why? Because they saw something on that mat that made them reconsider their assumptions. And because they're smart enough to know that what you demonstrated might save their lives someday. She set down the kit she was holding. Master Chief, half this base thinks I'm a problem that needs to be dealt with. The other half is waiting for me to fail. Running optional training sessions is just going to make the target on my back bigger. Torres met her eyes. Probably, but it's also going to give you allies, real ones. Operators who've trained with you, learned from you, respect what you can do. That matters more than you think. Thier looked away, stared at the wall of supplies. I didn't come here to make friends. No, you came here because someone punished you for having integrity. But now you're here, and you've got a choice. You can keep your head down, run the mandatory training, and count the days until you can transfer somewhere else. Or you can actually teach the people who want to learn and maybe change some minds in the process. She was quiet for a long time. Then she asked, what do you think I should do? Torres considered his answer carefully. I think you should do what you came into this job to do. Teach people how to survive situations that would kill them otherwise. Everything else is just noise. Thier looked back at him. When would these sessions happen? Tonight, 2000 hours, mat room 3, 20 men to start, probably more after word spreads. She nodded slowly. All right, I'll do it. Torres felt something loosen in his chest. Relief, maybe? Or hope. Good. And Sergeant, one more thing. Yes? Thank you for not giving up on this. Thier's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. Something that looked like gratitude or recognition, or maybe just the acknowledgement that she wasn't completely alone in this fight. I don't give up, Master Chief. It's not in my programming. Torres smiled slightly. I'm starting to figure that out. He left her to finish the inventory and headed back to his office. He had calls to make, arrangements to coordinate, the bureaucratic machinery that needed to be set in motion to ensure these unofficial training sessions didn't violate any regulations, even though they existed in a gray area that regulations didn't quite cover. But mostly he needed to prepare himself for what was coming, because word would spread. And when it did, Mercer and the others who opposed Thier's presence would have to decide whether to fight this development or accept it. Torres suspected they'd choose to fight. That evening at 1900 hours, Torres sat in the chow hall picking at food he didn't particularly want. The hall was half full, the usual clusters of operators eating together, talking about training or deployments, or the 1,000 small dramas that constituted military life. Maya Thier entered at 1920. She moved through the line, selected her meal, paid, then scanned the room for a seat. Most tables were occupied by groups who made no effort to make space for her. Then Morrison stood up at his table, called across the room. Sergeant Thier, we've got room here. The chow hall went quiet. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, heads turned, everyone watching to see what would happen. Thier hesitated for just a moment. Then she walked to Morrison's table and sat down. Morrison and the 3 operators with him shifted to make space, included her in their conversation like it was the most natural thing in the world. Torres watched the ripple effect spread through the room. Some operators looked away, uncomfortable with the public statement Morrison had just made. Others watched with interest, recalibrating their own positions based on who was aligning with whom. And in the back corner, Torres saw Senior Chief Wade Mercer sitting with Cordero and 2 other junior SEALs. Mercer's expression was controlled, neutral, but his jaw was tight and his knuckles were white where they gripped his fork. The battle lines were being drawn, not officially, not with formal declarations, but everyone in that chow hall understood what Morrison's gesture meant. The question was how many people would cross those lines and which direction they'd cross. At a table near the exit, Torres noticed Cordero lean toward one of his companions and whisper something. The other man nodded. They both glanced toward Thier, then quickly looked away when they saw Torres watching them. Torres filed that observation away. Cordero was becoming a pattern, always nearby when resistance formed, always whispering, always stirring. At 2000 hours, Torres arrived at mat room 3. The door was already open, lights on, and the space was crowded. Not 20 men, 40. Operators standing against the walls, sitting on the mat, filling every available space. Word had spread faster than Torres had expected. Maya Thier stood at the center of the mat, gear laid out beside her, waiting. She saw Torres enter, gave a small nod, then looked at the assembled crowd. She didn't start with pleasantries or introductions, just got to work. I'm going to teach you how to escape from positions where you can't use strength, where your size doesn't matter, where the only thing between you and captivity or death is understanding how the human body works and how to exploit its mechanical weaknesses. The room was absolutely silent. I need a volunteer, someone big, someone strong, someone who thinks they can hold me down. A hand went up in the back. Torres turned and saw the volunteer. Petty Officer Luis Vasquez, 6'3", 240 pounds, built like a linebacker, one of the most physically imposing operators on base. Vasquez moved to the mat, looked down at Thier with the kind of confidence that came from never having been physically dominated by someone half his size. Thier's voice was calm, instructional. Pin me the way you would in a real situation. Full force, no holding back. Vasquez hesitated. Ma'am, I don't want to hurt you. You won't. Vasquez glanced at Torres. Torres nodded. Do what she says. Vasquez moved, fast and competent, dropped his weight across her shoulders, locked her down with textbook technique, applied the kind of pressure that should have made escape impossible. Thier spoke while pinned, her voice steady despite the 240 pounds pressing down on her. Force doesn't originate from muscle mass. It comes from positioning, leverage ratios, exploiting anatomical weak points. Watch. She demonstrated slowly, breaking down each component of the movement. Where to place hands, how to rotate hips, which joints to target, the angle of pressure required to disable without destroying. Her explanation was clinical, precise, the voice of someone who'd thought deeply about every aspect of what she was teaching. Then she did it again at full speed. Vasquez hit the mat. Not injured, just controlled, neutralized. His face showed pure shock. He stood up, shook his head in disbelief, got back in line to watch more. For the next 90 minutes, Thier moved through different scenarios. Wrist locks, ankle manipulations, cervical spine controls. Each one explained with clinical precision. Each one demonstrated on volunteers of different sizes. The technique worked on a 220 operator the same way it worked on a 160 operator because it wasn't about strength. It was about understanding how joints failed and using that knowledge with surgical accuracy. Torres watched from the doorway, watched the way the operators absorbed the information, the way they asked questions, tried the techniques on each other, adjusted and refined their movements under Thier's guidance. This was real learning, the kind that happened when people checked their egos at the door and focused on getting better at their jobs. But he also watched the doorway. And 20 minutes into the session, he saw a face appear in the small window. Jake Cordero, watching, taking notes, then disappearing. Torres stepped outside quietly, scanned the area. Cordero was gone. But Torres had a bad feeling about what he'd been doing, gathering intelligence, reporting back to someone, building a case. At 21:30, Thier called an end to the session. The operators filed out slowly, still talking about what they'd learned, already planning to practice more on their own time. Morrison was the last to leave. He stopped in front of Thier. That was exceptional, Sergeant. My guys are going to be talking about this for weeks. Thier nodded, glad it was useful. Morrison glanced at Torres. Master Chief, we're going to want to do this again. Regular sessions if she's willing. Torres looked at Thier. She considered for a moment, then nodded. Twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays. 2000 hours. Same location. Morrison smiled. We'll be here. He left. Torres and Thier were alone in the mat room. That went better than I expected, Torres said. Thier began packing her gear. It went how it should have gone from the beginning. People learning from people who know things they don't. Torres helped her pack. You know this is going to make things harder with Mercer and his group? Probably. She paused. But I didn't join the Navy to make Senior Chief Mercer happy. I joined to do a job. Tonight I did that job. Torres picked up the last piece of equipment, handed it to her. You did more than that. You gave 40 operators tools they didn't have before. That's going to save lives. Thier looked at him. That's all I want, Master Chief. To be useful. Everything else is just background noise. They left the mat room together. Outside, the night was cold and clear, stars visible through breaks in the coastal clouds. Torres walked with her across the compound toward the barracks. As they approached her building, Torres's phone buzzed. He pulled it out, saw a message from Kane. Need to see you, Captain's office. 0700 tomorrow. It's about Mercer. Torres put his phone away. Thier had seen his expression change. Problem? Torres shook his head. Nothing you need to worry about. Just command business. She studied him for a moment. If it's about me, then yes, I do need to worry about it. Torres was quiet. Then he said, Mercer's going to face consequences for that email. Captain's calling a meeting tomorrow to discuss next steps. Thier absorbed that information. What kind of consequences? Don't know yet. But he created an environment where two operators thought it was acceptable to sabotage a demonstration. That's on him even if we can't prove he sent the email. Will he be separated? Torres looked up at the stars. Wade Mercer's been in the team's 28 years. He's a good operator, good leader. But he let his opposition to change override his judgment. Whether that's enough to end his career, I don't know. Thier was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that surprised Torres. I don't want him separated because of me. Torres looked at her. He set you up to fail. Maybe. But he did it because he believes he's protecting something important. He's wrong about the method, but I understand the instinct. She paused. I'd rather prove him wrong by succeeding than have him removed for opposing me. Torres felt a surge of respect for that position. That's generous. It's practical. If he gets forced out, it just confirms for everyone who agrees with him that this is about politics instead of capability. If he stays and watches me do my job successfully, maybe eventually he changes his mind. Maybe, Torres said, but don't hold your breath. Thier smiled slightly. I'm good at holding my breath, Master Chief. Ask the two guys I saved in the North Atlantic. Torres laughed. Fair point. They reached her building. Thier turned to head inside, then stopped. Master Chief, thank you for backing me, for making tonight happen, for treating me like someone who belongs here instead of someone who needs to prove they belong here. Torres met her eyes. You do belong here, Sergeant. Not because of politics or quotas or anyone's opinion, because you're good at what you do and people can learn from you. That's all that matters. Thier nodded once, then she went inside. Torres stood alone in the darkness for a moment, thinking about the meeting tomorrow, about Mercer and consequences and the difficult conversations that came when friendship collided with duty. Then he headed back to his own quarters. But before he'd gone 20 yards, he saw movement near the equipment building, a figure in the shadows. Torres stopped, watched. The figure moved toward the storage area where training equipment was kept. Torres recognized the silhouette, Cordero. He followed at a distance, keeping to the shadows. Watched Cordero enter the equipment storage, saw a flashlight beam moving inside. 5 minutes later, Cordero emerged, looked around furtively, then headed back toward the barracks. Torres waited until he was gone, then moved to the storage area, used his own access code to enter. Scanned the space with his flashlight. Everything looked normal at first. Then he noticed the climbing rope section. One of the long training ropes had been pulled from its storage hook, laid out on the floor. Torres examined it closely. Near the midpoint, several fibers had been partially severed, not cut completely through, just weakened. Enough that under load, under stress, the rope might fail. Torres's jaw tightened. He pulled out his phone, took photos from multiple angles, then carefully returned the rope to its original position. He'd need evidence, chain of custody, proof. But now he knew. Cordero wasn't just spreading poison, he was escalating, creating actual danger. And that meant the fight was about to get much more serious. Torres left the storage area, locked it behind him, and headed back to his quarters. The night had just become much more complicated. Tomorrow's meeting with Holt about Mercer would have to include this new development, because sabotage wasn't just about culture or resistance anymore. It was about safety, and that was a line Torres wouldn't let anyone cross. The night was far from over, and morning would come early, whether he was ready for it or not. The meeting in Captain Holt's office started at 0700 sharp. Torres arrived 5 minutes early with evidence photos on his phone and a knot of anger in his chest he was working hard to control. Commander Kane was already waiting in the hallway outside. Kane's expression was tight, controlled. The look of someone who'd spent the night thinking about difficult conversations and hadn't found any easy answers. Torres pulled Kane aside before they entered. "We've got a bigger problem than Mercer's email." Kane's eyes narrowed. "What happened?" Torres showed him the photos on his phone. Training rope and equipment storage. Partially severed fibers. "I saw Cordero in there last night at 22:30. Took these photos after he left." Kane studied the images. "Jesus, you report this to safety?" "Not yet. Wanted to loop in Holt first." At 06:59, the door opened. Captain Holt stood in the doorway, gestured them inside. Senior Chief Mercer was already there, sitting in one of the chairs facing Holt's desk, back straight, hands folded in his lap. He looked like a man who'd been called before a firing squad and was determined to face it with dignity. Torres and Kane took seats on either side of Mercer. Holt moved behind his desk but didn't sit. Just stood there, hands clasped behind his back, looking at the three men in front of him. "Before we begin," Torres said, "there's been a development." He explained what he'd witnessed, showed Holt the photos. Holt's expression darkened as he absorbed the information. "Do you believe this was intended for tomorrow's evolution?" Holt asked. Torres nodded. "That's my assessment, sir. The rope's scheduled for use in the obstacle course portion. If Staff Sergeant Thier had used it under load, it would have failed." Mercer spoke for the first time. His voice was quiet but firm. "Sir, I had nothing to do with any rope sabotage." Torres met his eyes. "But you created the environment where someone like Cordero thought that kind of action was acceptable." Holt held up a hand. "We'll address the rope situation separately. Security will investigate, evidence will be preserved. Right now, we're here to discuss the email." He turned his attention fully to Mercer. "The JAG investigation concluded yesterday. The email sent to Petty Officers Shaw and Brennan originated from a terminal in the Senior Command Administrative Office. Access logs show 4 people used that terminal in the relevant time window. Senior Chief Mercer, you were one of those 4. Mercer didn't flinch. "Yes, sir." "Did you send that email?" The silence stretched. Torres could hear his own heartbeat loud in his ears, counting the seconds. He'd known Mercer for 20 years, had deployed with him, trusted him with his life in situations where trust was the only thing keeping you alive. But he also knew that Mercer was principled to the point of stubbornness, that when he believed something, he believed it with absolute conviction, and that conviction could override judgment. Mercer finally spoke. "Yes, sir, I sent it." Holt's expression didn't change. "Why?" Mercer looked straight ahead, not at Holt, not at Torres or Kane, just at some fixed point on the wall behind the captain's desk. "Because I believed then, and I still believe now, that integrating women into SEAL training and operations compromises the standards that keep us alive. I thought Shaw and Brennan deserved to know that maintaining those standards was more important than making anyone comfortable." "That email didn't tell them to maintain standards," Holt said. "It told them to make sure the audit didn't become performance theater. That's coded language, Senior Chief. You know it, and I know it." "Sir, I never explicitly told them to violate protocol. You created an environment where they thought violating protocol was acceptable, where they thought proving a point was more important than following safety procedures." He paused. "And now we have evidence that someone in your circle of influence has escalated to active sabotage. 2 men are medically separated because of choices made under your influence. And tomorrow, a staff sergeant could have been seriously injured or killed because someone you've been coaching decided to take matters into their own hands." Mercer's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Holt leaned forward. "I have 3 options, Senior Chief. Court-martial for creating a hostile work environment and endangering service members. Administrative separation with reduction in rank. Or early retirement with full benefits contingent on certain conditions." "What conditions?" Mercer asked. "You publicly acknowledge that your actions were inappropriate. You cooperate fully with the investigation into the rope sabotage. You cease all opposition to Staff Sergeant Thier's presence and instruction, and you stay away from junior operators who might be influenced by your perspective." Mercer was quiet for a long moment. "What happens to my pension if I refuse?" Holt's expression softened slightly. "Your pension is secure regardless. 28 years of service earns you that, but your legacy, your reputation, how people remember you, that depends on how you handle the next 72 hours. Mercer absorbed that, looked at Torres for the first time since the meeting started. "What do you think I should do, Devin?" Torres met his eyes. I think you should consider that you might be wrong. Not about everything, but about this, about her. I watched two operators get their careers ended in 4 seconds. Torres leaned forward because they violated protocol and forced her to respond. Wade, I've watched the footage 20 times. She held back. She could have shattered joints, severed nerves, caused permanent damage. She didn't. She used minimum necessary force and then stopped. That's discipline. That's control. That's exactly what we train people to do. Mercer looked away. She's not as strong as a male operator. No, Torres agreed, but she doesn't need to be. She's smart enough, skilled enough, and disciplined enough to do the job she was assigned to do. And she's teaching 40 operators techniques that might save their lives. That has value, Wade. Real value. The room went quiet again. Holt waited, giving Mercer time to process. Kane sat motionless, watching but not interfering. Finally, Mercer spoke. I need 48 hours to think about this. Holt nodded. You have 72. After that, I need a decision. As for the rope sabotage, security will interview everyone with access to that storage area. If you have information about who might be responsible, now is the time to cooperate. Mercer was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, talk to Cordero. Jake Cordero. He's been more vocal than most about opposing the integration. Holt made a note. Dismissed. They filed out. In the hallway, Mercer turned to Torres. Can we talk privately? Torres checked his watch. I've got 30 minutes before a briefing. Walk with me. They headed outside, moved across the compound toward the training area. The morning was clear and cold, the marine layer having burned off early, leaving a pale blue sky that promised warmth later in the day. Neither man spoke for the first 100 yards, just walked in the familiar rhythm of operators who'd covered thousands of miles together over the years. Mercer finally broke the silence. You really think I'm wrong about this? Torres chose his words carefully. I think you're right that physical standards matter, that biology is real, that there are differences between men and women that can't be wished away. But I also think you're wrong that those differences automatically disqualify all women from all roles. Some women can't do this job, but some can, and Maya Thier is one of them. How can you be sure? Because I've seen her work under pressure, in a real emergency, and I've seen the results of her teaching. Morrison's guys are already better at constraint escape than they were 2 weeks ago. That's measurable improvement, Wade. That's what matters. Mercer stopped walking, turned to face Torres directly. What if you're wrong? What if she gets someone killed because she's not strong enough to carry them out of a kill zone or pull them up a cliff face or drag them through surf when they're wounded? Then that's on her, Torres said, same as it would be on any operator who failed to do their job. But Wade, we don't get to prejudge failure. We don't get to assume she'll fail just because she's different from us. We give her the same standard we give everyone else and see if she meets it. What standard? She's not going through buds. She's not doing Hell Week. She's not proving she can do what we do. Torres felt something click into place in his mind, an idea forming. Dangerous maybe, but necessary. What if she did? Mercer frowned. What? What if we gave her a Hell Week evolution? The one we use for reservist requalification. 12 hours, ocean swim, surf passage, obstacle course, combat conditioning. Same standard we hold every SEAL to. If she passes, she's proven she can do what we do. If she fails, we have our answer. Mercer stared at him. You're serious? Completely. She's a medic, Devin, not an operator. She's not trained for that kind of evolution. Then she'll fail. And this whole debate ends with objective data instead of opinions and politics. Mercer was quiet, thinking. Then he said, and if she passes? Torres met his eyes. Then you admit you were wrong and you support her staying here as lead instructor. That's a hell of a bet. It's the only bet that matters. Either she can do the job or she can't. Let's find out which. Mercer considered for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. All right, set it up, but I'm running safety. I want to make sure there's no advantage given, no corners cut. And I want that rope replaced and the storage area secured until we identify who's responsible for the sabotage. Torres extended his hand. Deal. They shook. For the first time in 2 weeks, Torres saw something like respect return to Mercer's eyes. Not agreement, not acceptance, but acknowledgement that maybe there was a path forward that didn't require anyone to completely abandon their principles. 3 hours later, Torres found Maya Thier in the medical supply room, conducting her daily inventory. She looked up when he entered, set down the clipboard she was holding. Master Chief, something wrong? Torres closed the door behind him. Depends on your perspective. He explained the situation. The meeting with Holt, Mercer's admission, the rope sabotage discovery, the proposal for a Hell Week evolution. Thea listened without interrupting, her expression neutral, but her eyes sharp, processing every detail. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, when? 72 hours. Gives you time to prepare. And if I refuse? Torres leaned against the wall. Then nothing changes. You keep teaching. Mercer keeps opposing you. The culture stays divided. Cordero and whoever else is involved stay emboldened, but if you do this, if you pass, you end the debate. You prove objectively that you meet the standard. Thea looked down at her hands. 12 hours of physical evolution. Ocean swimming, surf passage, obstacle course, combat conditioning. I'm not a SEAL candidate, Master Chief. I haven't trained for that. No, Torres agreed. But you've done 6 deployments in 3 combat zones. You've survived situations that would have killed most people. And you've got 72 hours to prepare. That's more time than most candidates get when things go sideways. She met his eyes. You think I can do this? I think you can try. Whether you succeed, that's on you. But I've seen what you can do under pressure. I've seen your discipline, your refusal to quit. If anyone can do this without SEAL pipeline training, it's you. Thea was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. All right, I'll do it. Torres felt relief wash through him. Good. Training starts now. I'll work with you personally. Every hour you're not on official duty, we're preparing. She looked at him with something like gratitude. Thank you, Master Chief. Don't thank me yet. Next 72 hours are going to be the hardest of your life. Thea smiled slightly. I've been underwater with rising water and dying oxygen. I think I can handle some physical training. Torres smiled back. We'll see. The preparation started that afternoon. Torres pulled her from administrative duties, got Kane's authorization for focused training prep. They started with the ocean swim, 2 miles in 58-degree water, swells running 4 to 6 feet. Thea's technique wasn't powerful, but it was efficient. She finished middle of the pack timing, not first but not last, conserving energy instead of pushing for speed. Torres watched from the safety boat, saw the way she paced herself, the way she adjusted her stroke for the swells instead of fighting them. Smart, calculated. The approach of someone who understood their limitations and worked within them. Day 2 focused on surf passage. They assembled a boat crew of 4 volunteers, including Cole Brennan with his arms still in a brace. Brennan had returned to base 2 days earlier, medically cleared for light duty while his radius healed. When Torres asked if he'd be willing to help with Thea's training, Brennan had agreed immediately. The waves were brutal. 8-foot swells crashing into the beach with the kind of violence that reminded you the ocean didn't care about your plans or your determination. It would crush you or carry you, and the choice wasn't always yours to make. Thea took position as coxswain, the caller who coordinated the crew's paddle strokes. Her voice cut through the roar of the surf, stroke, stroke, hold. Her timing was precise, her commands clear. The boat flipped twice in the first hour. Both times the crew recovered and pushed through. Brennan, paddling one-handed, spoke to her between waves. You don't need to prove anything to me, Sergeant. I already know what you can do. Thea's response was barely audible over the ocean. I'm not doing this to prove anything to you, Brennan. I'm doing it to prove something to myself. Day 3 was the obstacle course. 13 obstacles spread across 300 yards. Rope climbs, wall traverses, the slide for life, a 60-foot rope crossing over water. Torres had personally inspected every piece of equipment that morning, replaced the sabotaged rope, and posted security on the storage area. The new rope was tested, certified, safe. Thea attacked each obstacle methodically. She wasn't fast, wasn't elegant, but she completed every single one, adjusting her technique when strength wasn't sufficient, using leverage and momentum and sheer refusal to quit. On the rope climb, she struggled, made it 3/4 of the way up on her first attempt before her grip failed, slid back down, tried again, failed again. On the 3rd attempt, Torres called out from the ground, use your legs more, lock with your ankles, save your grip strength. She adjusted, made it to the top, rang the bell, descended in a controlled fall that Torres knew was going to hurt when the adrenaline wore off. The wall traverse required technique she didn't have. She tried 3 times, fell 3 times. On the 4th attempt, she stopped, looked at the wall, thought about it. Then she took off her boots, climbed in wet socks, using her toes to find purchase the boots couldn't. It took her twice as long, but she made it across. That night, Torres found her in the gym at 2200 hours, long after most of the base had secured for the day. She was working through her conditioning routine, moving slowly, precisely, maintaining her form even though exhaustion was visible in every movement. Torres watched from the doorway. After 10 minutes, he spoke. "You need to rest." Thea didn't stop moving. "I'll rest when it's over. If you don't rest, you won't finish." She completed her set, straightened, wiped sweat from her face. "Master Chief, with respect, I know my body. I know what it can take." Torres stepped into the gym. "I'm sure you do. But I also know that the operators who wash out of Hell Week aren't the ones who aren't strong enough. They're the ones who don't pace themselves, who burn out in the first 6 hours and have nothing left for the last 6. Thea looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "You're right, I'll get 6 hours sleep." Torres smiled. "Good, because tomorrow's the real test." The morning of the evolution arrived cold and gray. Torres was awake at 0400, unable to sleep, mind running through scenarios and contingencies. He dressed in layers, grabbed coffee from the chow hall, and headed to the beach where the course had been set up. 47 observers had volunteered to watch, not 300, just the ones who cared enough to show up at 0500 on their day off. Torres saw Morrison and his crew, saw Vasquez and the other operators who'd been attending Thea's training sessions, saw Commander Kane and Captain Holt standing together near the safety coordinator station. And he saw Mercer standing alone at the far end of the beach, arms crossed, expression unreadable. At 0530, Maya Thea arrived. She wore standard cold water gear, wetsuit, booties, gloves. Her face was calm, but Torres could see the tension in her shoulders. She was scared, smart enough to be scared, but moving forward anyway. Torres walked to meet her. "You ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be. Remember, this isn't about speed. It's about finishing. 12 hours. Just keep moving." She nodded, looked past him at the observers. "A lot of people here. They came to see if you can do it. What do you think they want the answer to be?" Torres considered that. Half of them want you to succeed, quarter want you to fail. The rest just want to see what happens when someone pushes themselves to the limit. "And you, Master Chief? What do you want?" "I want you to show them what discipline looks like." At 0600 hours, Captain Holt stepped forward. His voice carried across the beach. "Staff Sergeant Thea has requested to complete the standard reservist requalification evolution. 12 hours. 5 phases. Ocean swim, surf passage, obstacle course, combat conditioning, and final ruck march. Standard passing time is 12 hours. Any completion under that threshold constitutes a pass." He paused. "This is voluntary. She can stop at any time. Safety will monitor throughout. Medical will be on standby." He looked at Thea. "Any questions?" "No, sir." "Then begin." Thea walked into the ocean. The water was 58 degrees. The kind of cold that made your body seize up, made your muscles cramp, made your brain scream at you to get out before hypothermia set in. But she kept walking until the water reached her chest, then dove forward and started swimming. Torres tracked her from the safety boat. Her stroke was steady, rhythmic, conserving energy. The swells lifted and dropped her, making forward progress difficult. But she adjusted, found the rhythm of the ocean, worked with it instead of against it. 2 miles took her 53 minutes. She emerged from the water shivering, lips blue but moving. Grabbed a towel from the beach station, wrapped it around her shoulders, checked in with medical. Body temp was down to 96 degrees, on the edge of hypothermia but not critical. The medic asked if she wanted to warm up. She shook her head. "Keep moving. Generate heat internally." Phase 2 was surf passage. Her boat crew was waiting. Brennan at stroke position, 3 others filling out the crew. They launched into waves that seemed impossible, walls of water that could flip a boat and pin the crew underneath if they mistimed the approach. Thea called the cadence. Her voice was hoarse from the cold, but clear. The boat went over the first wave, dropped into the trough, climbed the second, flipped on the third. The crew went underwater, came up gasping, righted the boat, got back in, launched again. It took 7 attempts to make it through the surf zone. By the time they reached calmer water, an hour had passed. Thea's arms were shaking from the effort of calling commands while helping paddle with one hand when needed. But the boat was through. They paddled back to shore, launched again and again. The evolution called for 3 successful surf passages. Each one was harder than the last. Muscles fatigued, coordination degraded. The ocean didn't get easier. It just waited for you to make a mistake. On the final passage, the boat flipped 50 yards from the beach, close enough to shore that the water was shallow but the waves were breaking hardest. The crew went under, came up in the impact zone where waves hammered down with enough force to drive you into the sand and hold you there. Torres saw Thea go under, saw her surface, saw another wave crash over her. She went under again, stayed under longer this time. He was about to signal the safety swimmers when she surfaced, grabbed the overturned boat, helped the crew right it. They climbed back in, paddled the last 50 yards to shore, and dragged the boat up the beach. Thea collapsed to her knees, vomited seawater, sat there for 30 seconds with her head down, breathing in ragged gasps. Then she stood up and walked toward the obstacle course. Phase 3, 13 obstacles. Torres had watched hundreds of candidates run this course. The fast ones finished in 12 minutes. Average was 18. Anyone over 25 minutes was struggling. Thea started slow. She wasn't built for explosive power, wasn't built for the kind of upper body strength that made rope climbs and wall traverses look easy. But she was built for endurance, for refusing to quit, for finding a way when the obvious path wasn't available. The rope climb took her 4 attempts. Each time she got higher. Each time her grip failed and she slid back down. On the 4th attempt, she made it to the top, rang the bell, descended in a controlled fall that Torres knew was going to leave bruises. The wall traverse required the boot removal technique she'd practiced. She climbed in wet socks, using toe grip, slow but steady, made it across. Then she reached the slide for life. Torres watched her approach the 60-foot rope crossing, watched her look up at it, assess the distance. Her hands were already raw from the rope climb, wrapped in athletic tape that was coming loose from the seawater. She grabbed the rope, started across. Halfway through, something felt wrong. Torres saw it in her body language. The way she stopped. The way she looked down at the rope in her hands. She called out, "Master Chief, this rope feels wrong." Torres's pulse spiked. He jogged to the base of the structure, looked up. "What do you mean?" "Feels loose, like the fibers are separating." Torres immediately signaled the safety observer. "Stop the evolution. Get her down now." 2 safety personnel moved to the platform, helped Thea back across. When she was safely on the ground, Torres climbed up himself and examined the rope. His blood ran cold. This wasn't the rope he'd replaced that morning. Someone had switched it. The sabotaged rope was back in place. He pulled out his knife, cut a section, examined the fibers, partially severed, exactly like the one he'd found in storage. Mercer arrived at the base of the structure. "What's going on?" Torres climbed down, showed him the rope section. Someone switched the ropes. Put the sabotaged one back. Mercer's face went white. "When?" "Had to be between 0400 when I finished setup and 0600 when we started." Torres looked at the gathered observers. Who had access to this area during that window? "Everyone here," Mercer said quietly. "It was unsecured until the evolution began." Torres pulled out his phone, called base security. "This is Master Chief Torres. I need security to the obstacle course immediately. We have evidence of sabotage." Within 10 minutes, the area was cordoned off. Captain Holt arrived, listened to Torres's report, examined the evidence. "Who did the equipment inspection this morning?" Holt asked. "I did personally," Torres said. "At 0400, that rope was new, tested, certified safe. Someone replaced it in the 2 hours between my inspection and the evolution start." Holt's expression was grim. "We're stopping the evolution until this is resolved." "Sir," Thea stepped forward, "I'd like to continue. Replace the rope and let me finish." Holt looked at her. "Staff Sergeant, someone just tried to injure or kill you." "And they failed," she said. "Because I pay attention. Because I know when something's wrong. Stopping now just gives them what they want." Holt looked at Torres. "Master Chief?" Torres met Thea's eyes, saw the determination there, saw the refusal to let sabotage derail her. "Sir, if we replace the rope and post security on all equipment from this point forward, I believe we can continue safely." Holt considered. Then he nodded. "Replace the rope. Post security. We continue. But I want the saboteur identified. Today." They replaced the rope, posted 2 armed guards at the equipment area. The evolution resumed 30 minutes later, with Thea completing the slide for life without incident. The delay had cost her 40 minutes, but she kept moving. Finished the obstacle course in 47 minutes total, including the sabotage interruption. Phase 4 was combat conditioning. Buddy carries, tire flips, ammo can lifts. The evolution's designed to test whether you had anything left after 3.5 hours of ocean and obstacles. Thea was paired with Vasquez again. The buddy carry was 200 yards. She got Vasquez onto her shoulders in a fireman's carry, took 3 steps, nearly collapsed, reset, tried again, made it 10 yards, 20. Her legs were shaking. 50 yards. She stopped, dropped to one knee, breathing like she'd just sprinted a mile. Torres walked alongside but didn't speak. Didn't encourage or discourage, just observed. Thea stood up, got Vasquez back onto her shoulders, kept moving. 100 yards, 150. Her pace had slowed to barely more than a shuffle, but she was still moving. 200 yards. She lowered Vasquez, sat down hard, put her head between her knees. Medical approach to check vitals. She waved them off. Just need a minute. Vasquez took his turn carrying her. Made it look easy because he was 90 pounds heavier and trained for this. When they finished, he offered his hand to help her up. Thank you, she said. You're tougher than you look, Sergeant. The tire flips and ammo can lifts were mechanical, repetitive. The kind of thing where your body went on autopilot and your mind wandered to places you didn't want it to go. Torres saw Thea's face go blank, saw her retreat somewhere internal, somewhere that let her keep functioning when conscious thought would have told her to stop. Phase 4 took 90 minutes. She was 7 hours into the evolution, counting the 40-minute sabotage delay. Passed halfway on time, but Torres knew the second half was where people broke, where accumulated fatigue and pain and doubt combined into a force that was harder to overcome than any physical obstacle. The final phase was an 8-mile ruck march. 50-pound pack, soft sand, the kind of movement that destroyed knees and ankles and turned simple walking into an exercise in grinding misery. Thea shouldered the pack, took her first step. Her legs nearly buckled. She caught herself, reset, kept moving. The first mile took 23 minutes. Slow but steady. The second mile took 28. Her pace was degrading. The third mile took 35. She was hitting the wall, the point where your body started shutting down non-essential systems, and every step became a negotiation with muscles that wanted to cramp and joints that wanted to lock up. At mile 4, she stumbled, caught herself, kept moving. Her stride had shortened to barely more than a shuffle. Her face was gray, sweat and seawater mixing, dripping off her chin. Torres watched from the support vehicle. Mercer was beside him, silent, observing. Neither man spoke. At mile 6, Thea went down. Not a stumble, a collapse. She hit the sand face first, pack driving her down, and didn't move for 5 seconds. 10, 15. Torres opened the door, started to get out. Mercer grabbed his arm. Wait. Torres looked at him. She's done, Wade. Mercer shook his head. Watch. Thea's hands moved, dug into the sand, pushed. She got to her knees, stood up, took a step, another, kept moving. Mercer's voice was quiet. That's not training, that's something else. At mile 7, Cole Brennan and Garrett Shaw appeared, both walking from the opposite direction, both injured, both medically unfit for duty, both choosing to be there anyway. They fell in on either side of Thea. Didn't touch her, didn't carry her pack, just walked alongside. Thea looked at Shaw. Her voice was barely audible. What are you doing here? Shaw's response was simple. Finishing what we started. They walked the final mile together. 3 people who'd been enemies 2 weeks ago, now moving through the soft sand in silent solidarity. Thea in the middle, pack on her back, every step costing her. Shaw and Brennan flanking, bearing witness. The finish line was a simple marker in the sand. No fanfare, no celebration, just a point on the beach that meant the evolution was over. Thea crossed it at 11 hours and 47 minutes, 13 minutes under the 12-hour standard. She took 3 more steps, dropped the pack, and collapsed. Medical rushed in, checked her vitals, body temp 95 degrees, severe dehydration, muscle damage throughout her legs and core, but conscious, responsive, alive. Torres approached, knelt beside him. She looked up at him through eyes that could barely focus. Did I pass? Torres nodded. You passed. She closed her eyes. Good. Then let me sleep. They carried her to medical on a stretcher. The observers dispersed quietly, talking in low voices, processing what they'd witnessed. Torres stood alone on the beach, looking at the track in the sand where she'd walked that final mile. Mercer appeared beside him. I was wrong. Torres looked at him. About what? About her. About what matters. About the difference between strength and capability. Mercer paused. She's not as strong as most men here, but she's got something else. Something I didn't recognize because I wasn't looking for it. What's that? Mercer looked at the stretcher disappearing toward the medical building. Refusal, absolute refusal to let circumstances define her limits. That's worth more than muscle mass. Torres nodded. Yeah, it is. They stood together in silence. Then Mercer said, I'll cooperate fully with the sabotage investigation, and I'll take whatever consequences Holt decides are appropriate. Torres extended his hand. Thank you, Wade. They shook. The evolution was over. The test was complete, and now they had to figure out what came next, starting with finding whoever had tried to hurt Maya Thier and making sure they faced justice. Maya Thier spent 48 hours in medical, not because her injuries were life-threatening, but because the accumulation of hypothermia, dehydration, and muscle damage required monitoring that couldn't happen in her barracks room. Torres visited twice a day, bringing reports she shouldn't have been reading and updates on base operations she didn't technically need to know about. But both of them understood that staying connected to the work was what kept her sane while her body recovered from what she'd put it through. On the afternoon of the first day, while Thier was sleeping, Torres received a call from base security. They'd identified the saboteur. Jake Cordero had been picked up that morning trying to leave the base. A routine vehicle inspection had found climbing rope in his trunk, the same type used on the obstacle course with identical fiber patterns to the sabotage sections. When confronted, he'd requested a lawyer. But 3 hours later, after security showed him the evidence photos Torres had taken, the access logs placing him near the storage area, and witness statements from 2 junior SEALs who'd overheard him talking about teaching Thier a lesson, Cordero had broken. Torres sat in the observation room watching the interview through one-way glass. Lieutenant Commander Porter was conducting the questioning, with Captain Holt and Senior Chief Mercer observing alongside Torres. On the other side of the glass, Cordero sat hunched in his chair, hands clasped on the table, looking younger than his 25 years. His voice was barely audible through the speakers. I didn't mean for anyone to get hurt, he said. I just wanted her to fail, to prove she didn't belong. Porter's voice was level, professional. By sabotaging safety equipment, by creating a situation where she could have been killed. Cordero's face crumpled. I thought if the rope broke, she'd just fall into the water. I didn't think about the height, about the impact. I wasn't thinking clearly. Who else was involved? Cordero shook his head. Nobody. This was just me. Porter leaned forward. Petty Officer Cordero, we have evidence of coordination. The timing of the rope replacement, the access to secure areas. You didn't do this alone. Cordero's eyes flicked up toward the mirror, as if he could see through it. Then he looked down again. Senior Chief Mercer didn't tell me to do it, but he created the environment where I thought it was the right thing to do. He talked about standards, about protecting the teams, about not letting political correctness compromise our capabilities. I thought I was helping. In the observation room, Mercer's face was stone, but Torres saw the way his hands clenched into fists, the tension in his jaw. Porter continued. Did Senior Chief Mercer know about your plan? No, Cordero's voice was firm on this point. He never knew, never would have approved. This was my decision, my mistake. The interview continued for another 30 minutes. Cordero provided details. Timeline, method, rationale. When it was over, Porter stepped out and joined them in the observation room. He's telling the truth about Mercer not knowing, she said. Polygraph confirms it, but his statement about the cultural environment is documented. That's going to be part of the report. Mercer spoke for the first time. What happens to him? Porter's expression was grim. Court-martial. Likely dishonorable discharge. Possible federal charges for sabotage and reckless endangerment. He's looking at prison time. Mercer nodded slowly. Good, he deserves it. Holt turned to Mercer. And you, Senior Chief? Mercer met his eyes. I'll take whatever consequences you decide are appropriate, sir. I didn't tell Cordero to sabotage equipment, but I created the mindset that made him think it was acceptable. That's on me. Holt was quiet for a moment. Then he said, you have a choice, Wade. Face administrative action that will likely end your career in disgrace, or retire immediately with full benefits and spend the next year as a civilian consultant helping us unfuck the cultural problems you helped create. Mercer's eyebrows rose. Consultant? We're establishing a training program on leadership ethics and cultural accountability. You'll help design it. You'll teach it. You'll use your experience, both positive and negative, to make sure the next generation of leaders doesn't make the mistakes you made. It won't be comfortable. You'll have to be honest about your failures, but it'll be useful. Torres watched Mercer process that, saw the conflict on his face. Pride versus pragmatism. Legacy versus comfort. Finally, Mercer nodded. I'll do it. When do I start? As soon as Staff Sergeant Thier is cleared from medical, Holt said, because the first thing you're going to do is apologize to her. Publicly, in front of the same 301 men who watched what happened on that mat. Mercer's jaw tightened, but he didn't hesitate. Yes, sir. 2 days later, Maya Thier was released from medical. Torres met her at the entrance, offered to carry her bag, got a look that told him she'd carry her own gear or die trying. They walked across the compound toward the barracks in comfortable silence. As they passed the training building, Morrison emerged with a group of operators. He saw Thier called out. Sergeant, got a minute? Thier and Torres altered course. Morrison's expression was serious but not hostile. My team deploys to Kandahar in 6 weeks. I want to request that you run an intensive training block before we leave. 3 days, full immersion, every technique you know. We've been practicing what you taught us, but we need more. Thier considered. 3 days, 20 hours minimum. You sure your guys are ready for that? Morrison smiled. Sergeant, we just watched you complete a 12-hour Hell Week evolution on 3 days prep. I think we can handle 20 hours of training. Thier nodded. All right, we start Monday, 0600, don't be late. As they continued toward the barracks, Torres spoke. You know you're supposed to be recovering, right? Medical recommended 2 weeks light duty. Thier glanced at him. Master Chief, with respect, I've been on light duty for 18 months. Ever since Sutherland buried me here to punish me for having integrity. I'm done being on light duty. Torres smiled. Fair enough. That evening, Torres found Cole Brennan waiting outside his office. The younger man's arm was out of the brace now, wrapped in a compression sleeve that indicated the bone was healed, but not yet at full strength. Master Chief, I need to talk to you about my future in the teams. They went inside. Sat. Brennan explained his situation. Medical board clearance for light duty, but never full operational status. His request to become assistant instructor under Thier. Torres listened, then asked, what does Garrett think about this? Shaw's already put in for motivational speaker rotation. He's going to travel to different teams talking about ego management and the cost of letting pride override judgment. We talked about it, decided we needed to own what we did and try to turn it into something useful. Torres felt something close to pride. That took guts. Brennan smiled slightly. Sergeant Thier could have destroyed us on that mat. Shattered joints, permanent nerve damage. She didn't. She used minimum force and then stopped. If she can show that kind of discipline when we gave her every reason not to, the least we can do is show the same discipline in how we handle the consequences. Torres sent a text to Thier. She arrived 3 minutes later. Brennan repeated his request. Thier listened, then asked one question. If I take you on as assistant instructor, you follow my lead. You don't question my methods in front of students. You don't undermine my authority. You accept that I'm the subject matter expert and you're there to learn and support. Can you do that? Yes, Sergeant. Thier looked at Torres. All right, I'll take him. But he starts at the bottom, no special treatment. Torres nodded. Brennan, you're assigned to instruction cadre effective Monday. After Brennan left, Thier remained. Master Chief, when is Mercer's public statement? Tomorrow. 1400 hours. Same arena where the demonstration happened. Thier was quiet, then she said, I don't want him humiliated. Torres looked at her. He created the environment that nearly got you killed. And now he's facing consequences. That's enough. Public humiliation doesn't serve any purpose except making him an enemy instead of an ally. Torres considered. What do you want? I want him to be honest, to acknowledge what he did wrong, but I also want him to keep his dignity. Because if he walks away from this destroyed, everyone who agreed with him will just dig in deeper. But if he walks away changed, maybe they change too. Torres felt renewed respect for her perspective. I'll talk to Holt. Make sure the statement stays professional. Thank you. The next afternoon, 301 Navy SEALs assembled in the arena. Same formation as the demonstration 2 weeks earlier. But the energy was different. Quieter, more somber. Senior Chief Wade Mercer walked onto the mat alone. He wore dress uniform, no notes, no prepared remarks. just a man who'd spent 28 years in the teams and was about to admit he'd been wrong. He came to attention, then he spoke. 2 weeks ago, I sent an anonymous email to 2 operators encouraging them to maintain standards during a demonstration. I didn't tell them to violate protocol, but I created an environment where they thought violating protocol was acceptable, where they thought proving a point was more important than following safety procedures. My words led to their injuries. That's on me. He paused. Let that settle. I also created a cultural environment where a junior operator, Petty Officer Cordero, thought it was acceptable to sabotage safety equipment. He did it because he believed he was protecting the teams. He believed it because I taught him that protecting standards mattered more than protecting people. I was wrong. He was wrong. And Staff Sergeant Thayer could have been killed because of it. Mercer's voice remained steady, professional, no self-pity. I've spent the past 48 hours thinking about what matters, about the difference between standards and prejudice, about the difference between protecting something valuable and protecting my own comfort. He looked directly at the formation. Standards don't fall when we include capable people. They fall when we stop caring about excellence and start caring about gatekeeping. He turned toward where Thayer stood at the edge of the arena. Staff Sergeant Thayer, you've proven your capability beyond any reasonable doubt. You've earned your place here through competence, discipline, and a refusal to quit even when quitting would have been easier. I was wrong to oppose you. I was wrong to create an environment where others felt empowered to oppose you. And I apologize. Thayer stepped forward, came to attention, accepted the apology with a simple nod. Mercer turned back to the formation. I'm retiring from active duty. I'll serve as a civilian consultant helping to develop training on leadership ethics and cultural accountability. I'll use my failures to help make sure the next generation of leaders doesn't repeat them. That's the only way I can make this right. He came to attention one final time, saluted the formation, then he walked off the mat. The arena was silent for a long moment. Then Morrison started clapping. Slow, steady, others joined. Not enthusiastically, just acknowledgement, respect for someone owning their mistakes. Holt stepped forward, dismissed. The formation dispersed. Torres found Mercer afterward, standing alone near the equipment building. That took courage, Wade. Mercer shook his head. Courage is what she showed, walking into a situation where everyone wanted her to fail and refusing to quit. What I just did was basic integrity. Should have done it 2 weeks ago. Better late than never. Mercer looked at him. Devin, I need you to do me a favor. Name it. Keep me honest. When I'm designing this training program, when I'm teaching these classes, if I start sliding back into old patterns, call me on it. Torres extended his hand. You've got my word. They shook. 6 weeks passed. Morrison's team completed their intensive training and deployed to Kandahar. Maya Thayer's training sessions expanded to 4 times weekly, attendance growing past 100 operators. The techniques became standard conversation in team rooms. 2 months into Morrison's deployment, Torres received a classified after-action report. One of Morrison's operators had been separated during an urban raid, grabbed by 3 hostiles, restrained in a basement compound. He'd used Thayer's constraint survival techniques to escape, disabled 2 captors non-lethally, evaded the third, and called for extraction. 0 friendly casualties. Mission success. The report didn't name Thayer specifically, but Morrison's debrief made it clear. Torres forwarded the report without comment. She read it, filed it, never mentioned it. But Torres saw the way she carried herself afterward. The quiet confidence of someone who knew their work had saved a life. 3 months after the Hell Week evolution, Torres sat in Holt's office again. This time with Kane, Mercer, and Castellano. Gentlemen, Holt began, Naval Special Warfare Command has made a decision. The Thayer Protocol will become mandatory training for all SEAL teams, all MARSOC units, and all Ranger battalions. We're establishing a permanent school here at Triton. Torres absorbed that. How permanent? Dedicated building, full-time instructor staff, 18-week pipeline for students rotating from across SOCOM. Holt paused. They want Master Chief Torres as commandant, Staff Sergeant Thayer as lead instructor, Senior Chief Mercer as senior enlisted advisor for the ethics component. Mercer looked surprised. Sir, I'm retired. Civilian consultant position. You'll help design the cultural curriculum. Make sure we're not just teaching techniques, we're teaching the mindset that makes those techniques effective. Holt turned to Torres. This assignment is 3 years. You've got 6 months until retirement eligibility. you'd need to extend. Torres thought about his daughter, his grandkids, the civilian life waiting. But he looked at what they'd built over 4 months and made his decision. I'll extend 3 years. The school was established over the next 6 months. Purpose-built facility. Proper funding. The first class arrived in January. Brennan flourished as assistant instructor. His injury prevented some demonstrations, but he became exceptional at breaking down complex movements. Students responded because he was honest about his limitations and how he'd earned them. Shaw's speaker rotation took him to 7 SEAL teams. His message was simple: ego kills. The strongest person in the room is the one who admits when they're wrong. 9 months after the Hell Week evolution, Torres received a brief about Syria. Lieutenant Mia Keller, one of the first female SEAL candidates, had been separated from her team, captured, held in a basement. She'd escaped using Thier's techniques, disabled 3 captors without killing them, called for extraction. Her debrief credited the training she'd received at Triton 6 months earlier. Credited Maya Thier. Torres forwarded the brief. Thier responded simply, "This is why we do it." 1 year after the MAT demonstration, Holt organized a ceremony. 301 SEALs assembled in the arena. Holt spoke briefly. "1 year ago, something happened in this arena that changed how we think about standards and capability. What happened wasn't comfortable, but it was necessary." He presented a modified Triton to Thier. Same design with a small addition. The notation 301, to remember the witnesses. Every operator who completes constraint survival training will receive this. To remember that standards don't fall when we include capable people. They fall when we stop caring about excellence. The formation applauded, not forced, just steady acknowledgement. 2 years after the demonstration, Torres stood in dress uniform for his retirement ceremony. 38 years of service, 4 wars, more deployments than he could count. Holt read the commendation. Kane presented the flag. Mercer, retired for 6 months but still working as consultant, read a letter from the SOCOM commandant. But the moment Torres remembered happened after the ceremony. Maya Thier, now lieutenant commander after a battlefield promotion, approached privately. "Master Chief," she said, then corrected. "Devin, 18 months ago, I thought my career was over. You could have let that happen. Instead, you backed me, tested me, gave me room to prove myself. Everything we've built started with you making that choice." Torres shook his head. "I didn't build this. You did. You held the line," she said, "against Mercer, against Cordero, against everyone who wanted me to fail. That matters more than you know." Torres felt something tighten in his throat. "What's next for you?" SOCOM wants to expand the program. Additional locations. More instructors. They're asking me to oversee it. "You gonna do it?" "Someone needs to make sure the standards stay high. Might as well be me." They shook hands. The handshake lasted longer than protocol required. "Good luck, Commander." "You too, Master Chief." Torres walked to his daughter's car. He didn't look back. He knew what he was leaving. A program training thousands. Techniques saving lives. A culture changed. That was legacy. 5 years later, Devin Torres sat in a San Diego coffee shop reading the paper. 63 years old, fully retired, spending days with grandkids and woodworking. His phone buzzed, text from Kane, linked to a Navy press release. Lieutenant Commander Maya Thier, promoted to Director of Advanced Tactical Medicine, Naval Special Warfare Command. The article detailed accomplishments: program expansion to 42 locations, documented life-saving applications, integration into allied nation training. Torres read it twice, texted Kane back. She earned it. Damn right she did. Torres returned to his paper, but his mind wandered to that day 5 years ago. 301 witnesses watching culture shift in real time. His phone rang. Unknown number. "Master Chief Torres?" Female voice. Young, nervous energy. "This is Torres. Who's this?" "Sir, my name is Seaman Recruit Jessica Park. I'm in week 3 of Bud ECS. My instructor said I should call you." Torres sat up. "What can I do for you, Recruit Park?" "Sir, I'm the first Korean-American woman to attempt the SEAL pipeline. It's hard, really hard. There are days I want to quit." She paused. "But my instructor told me about a staff sergeant who got sent to Triton 5 years ago, who got tested unfairly, who proved she belonged by refusing to quit. He said if I was serious, I should talk to someone who knew her." Torres smiled. "What do you want to know?" "I want to know if it's worth it. If proving yourself to people who don't think you belong is worth the cost." Torres thought about Maya standing in that hospital bed, Brennan asking to serve under her. Morrison's team using her techniques in combat. 301 men learning respect. Yeah, he said, it's worth it, but only if you're doing it for the right reasons. What are the right reasons? Because you want to be useful, because you want to save lives, because you believe the job matters more than anyone's opinion. He paused. If you're doing it to prove people wrong, you'll burn out. If you're doing it because you know you can contribute something valuable, you'll make it through. Silence. Then, thank you, Master Chief. That helps. One more thing, recruit. Yes, sir? When you get through BUDS, and you will if you want it badly enough, go to Triton. Take the Constraint Survival course. Learn from Commander Thier. She'll teach you how to survive when everything else fails. I will, sir. I promise. The call ended. Torres sat thinking about cycles and legacy, about how courage rippled forward through time. Somewhere in Coronado, a young woman was running through surf, fighting to prove she belonged. Somewhere in Kandahar, an operator was using techniques learned at Triton. Somewhere in Virginia, commanders were reviewing data showing constraint survival reduced casualties by 18%. And somewhere, Maya Thier was running a program that had grown from one woman teaching 40 volunteers to a global initiative changing how special operations thought about survival and capability. Torres had held the line, given her room to prove herself, watched her turn punishment into purpose. That was worth 38 years. He finished his coffee, gathered his paper, headed home. Part of him would always be at that arena, watching 301 men learn something unexpected. Witnessing culture shift, standards evolve, belonging expand. That moment mattered. The ripples kept spreading, carried by people, taught by people, taught by people. Maya Thier had held the line when breaking would have been easier. Devin Torres had held it when looking away would have been simpler. Wade Mercer had chosen growth over pride. Brennan and Shaw had found redemption through honesty. 301 witnesses carried it forward. The standard continued, not lowered. Proven achievable through discipline and technique, an absolute refusal to let circumstances define limits. That was legacy, worth remembering. In coffee shops and team rooms around the world, the story was still told, still taught, still inspiring those who needed to believe capability mattered more than assumptions. The price of standards wasn't lowering them. It was testing them against reality and accepting results that challenged everything you thought you knew. Devin Torres had paid that price. So had Maya Thier. So had everyone in that arena who chose learning over resistance. The investment paid dividends beyond projection and would keep paying long after the last witness was gone. That was how culture changed. Through witness competence that couldn't be dismissed. Through people who refused to quit when quitting was easier. Through leaders who held the line and gave capable people room to prove themselves. 301 witnesses, one standard, a legacy outlasting them all. The work continued. The mission endured. The line held. And somewhere, someone was learning what that meant.